All right, we'll call to order the Planning Commission meeting for February 13th. If you would join me in saluting the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and the first item on the agenda is to appoint a new chair and vice chair.
I'd like to nominate our friend Dan to continue.
I second.
Since you've been doing a great job at it. So unless you don't want to do it.
Do we have a fourth?
Fourth.
Awesome, so we just voted.
Okay. All right. No, that's okay. No, thank you. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Acceptance speech?
I accept your nomination and the vote, I guess. And now vice chair?
If you're willing, Jan, I'd like to re-nominate Jan.
It's been a hard job, but I could do it again.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
That was easy.
That was easy.
That's how things go around here on the Planning Commission.
Dan, you're reliable enough that I haven't had to do much.
What do you want?
Someday it'll happen. All right. Next, if you've all had a chance to look over the agenda, any changes or additions to the agenda?
Dan, did you want to add a discussion of Pam's letter, at least on a preliminary basis?
Sure. Yeah. Let's do that. That's a good idea.
And just slide it in under comp plan, just 6C.
6C. Okay.
Actually, it might fit in better before the review of the draft chapters, considering the content.
Well, we have, those are already prepared.
All right.
Maybe we can revisit what's in the water resources section after we.
I move to approve.
I agree.
I move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, and any comments or additions to the minutes? Any changes? The minutes from January 2nd meeting?
I think I saw
Typo?
a very minor typo, but
The his
I
and
did.
this?
Yes, the his and this, but
What page? Where?
as usual, something that a spell checker wouldn't get.
Yeah. What page?
I'm sorry, I saw it, I didn't note it.
Yeah, it was. I didn't circle it. I can point it out to you later.
Okay.
It
We
was
can always
not
correct clerical errors.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Okay.
All right.
Move for approval minutes of January 2, 2018 meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and that brings us to our application for the variance from the setbacks for 19235 Larkspur. Sherry?
Right.
Oh, sorry, we should discuss.
Oh yeah, how we do this.
Yeah, all right, so for the public meetings, we will have the city planner give a report, and after her report is over, then we will open it up for public comment, and then we will close public comment, and then the commission will have our discussion. All right?
All right. So this is a request from Shannon Mulvihill. Are you Shannon?
Yes.
All right. So this is for a property that she has just purchased at 19235 Larkspur. In fact, we'll have to change this when it goes to the council because the Smiths no longer own it. She now owns these two parcels that Neil is putting up on the screen. Actually, the old survey shows 3 parcels, but the northern 2 are combined now, and so there's the narrow strip at the south end of the parcel that is part of her property. And she is interested in building a garage, a fairly small one, 16 by 20. You can see the contour, just the numbers along this survey, and what it shows you is that the half of the parcel has very steep slopes. In fact, a lot of it is 30% slope. So the garage cannot be built back there. There's also a pretty tight area between the cabin and her neighbor's property. There's an existing driveway there. And so the difficulty is trying to fit any kind of a garage on this parcel given the slopes and the trees and the location of existing buildings and septic system and all of that. So we have typically allowed people to have variances to have a garage. Everyone has felt that people need to have at least a one-car garage in Minnesota's climate, and so the city has been willing to give a variance. Typically, we try to keep things as far from the bluffs and the lake as possible, outside the bluff impact zone when we can, and the city has been more forgiving about granting a variance from the roadway right-of-way, for instance, than granting a variance from the bluff setback. So that's part of the sort of background to this one. In looking at this, the proposed use is consistent with the comp plan. You all know the comp plan also talks about protecting bluffs and shoreland areas, and so we need to find a way to do the best we can about protecting those in this case. Shannon proposed a location of the garage as shown here, 36 feet from the road right-of-way. The standard requirement is 40 feet. The existing house is 31 and sort of a half foot. And she also asked to be 2 feet from the neighboring parcel. After looking at this a bit and also looking at a variance that was granted to a neighbor, staff are recommending that we allow her to be closer to the roadway in order to stay outside the bluff impact area and as far from the bluffs as we can, which would mean she would be, based on the staff recommendation, she'd be about 20 feet from the bluff line, 15 feet from the road right-of-way. You can see my little sketch here of putting that garage closer to the roadway, and about 5 feet off the neighboring property line. And the rationale for that 5 feet is that you do need some space to build and maintain the garage without trespassing on the neighbor's property. So driveways are required to be at least 5 feet from neighboring parcels with that same idea. Typically, we have required structures to be at least 5 feet from a neighboring property line, so that people can paint their garage when they need to, do repairs, you know, have gutters on them that don't drain onto their neighbor's property, that kind of thing. Otherwise, she meets the requirements. There's only a small shed on the parcel. There's no issue about the number of accessory structures. This would meet the lot coverage requirement, the building height requirement. There's no need to change anything about the wastewater system or well. Ryan reviewed this one, and his comments were that as much as possible the drainage should be directed toward the driveway rather than toward the neighbor's parcel. So he encouraged gutters and roof leaders that would take the drainage away. Putting it a little farther from the neighbor's property line and closer to the street would also help with controlling that drainage and sending it out toward the street. So that recommendation is in the report. The watershed district looked at it. They said they have no comments on it and it doesn't need a watershed permit, the garage. Same from the DNR, they had no comments or concerns about this. So the rationale starts on page 5. Shannon's rationale is there's no location where the garage could be put on the parcel that would meet all the setback requirements. She needs a garage in Minnesota, and the side lot line and roadway variances are being requested to keep the garage as far from the bluff as possible. Variances can only be granted when they're in harmony with the comp plan and the general purpose and intent of the ordinance. In this case, the use is in harmony with the comp plan. Keeping it as far from the bluff as possible will help to make it consistent with the goals and policies in the comp plan. This is a reasonable use. It's something that's allowed in the zoning ordinance. The practical difficulties are not something she created. They're primarily the bluff and the location of the existing buildings on the parcel. It won't change the character of the area. In fact, her neighbors have a pretty similar variance in terms of setback of their garage. So it's not going to change how the neighborhood looks. It's not economic conditions only, it's largely the physical nature of the parcel. This is the neighbor's parcel where I think this was included for you guys. You can see the garage was placed closer to the road than the house with a similar setback, and then I think it's 4 feet from the neighboring property line. And this one would not affect light or solar energy for the neighbors next door. It's pretty much the minimum action required in order to allow her to have a garage on this parcel, is to let it be, closer to the road, as far from the bluff as we can get it. So the staff recommendation is to approve the variance for a garage that would be a minimum of 20 feet from the bluff line, 15 feet from the right-of-way of Larkspur Avenue North, and 5 feet from the side property line, with some pretty standard conditions that you see on page 7.
Thank you.
Do we need to summarize our meeting at the property?
Let's do that. Should we summarize our discussion at the site now, or should we do that after the public?
I think after the public.
After the
If we
public.
do that, it's gonna start discussion.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll open up to for public comment, if anybody wants to make a comment. No? All right, we will close the public comment section and move to our discussion. So we did have some discussion on the site, and there. Go ahead. Did you want?
We didn't have any actual discussion.
We didn't have any discussion. There was just some observations made on the site. Thank
And
you,
what
Charlie.
did you observe? Because I haven't been there.
Yeah.
Neil has been there, but I have not.
We observed a couple of things. One being that, and obviously this is just a sketch, so it's not exact, but the wellhead would be very close to the corner of the garage on your sketch.
Okay.
It appears. Obviously, that would be very difficult to
And
tell.
my sketch
Get them.
forgot that little strip of land is her parcel. So actually, that building should be 5 feet from, it should be shifted down.
Closer
Yeah.
this way.
Yeah,
Right now
Okay.
it says driveway.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that
Okay.
line that says 133.
Right over that word that says driveway is about where it would be. So hopefully then, I think, is it 10 feet that you have to have the well from a building? Or 3?
3 feet.
3 feet.
Okay.
So based on being out there, if that building gets moved, do you think it might be 3 feet?
No, I think it'll be all right.
Okay.
Perhaps. Yeah, probably.
From
Yeah.
the well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'll be on it.
If it gets, I think it would be.
It's going to be pretty close. It's going to be pretty close.
3 feet is close.
3 feet is pretty close. Yeah. It would be probably 3
It
feet.
would also be with, like, taking down those 2 majestic trees.
That's a good point. There are 2 trees right there.
Very
Right in
large.
that spot, there are 2 very large
What's that?
trees.
Majestic is
And
the
did
word
you
I'm using to
see
help
it
this.
way to not have the trees removed?
No, they're right. They're right in that spot where that would be.
Yeah, I think that was kind of what, I looked at Neil's pictures and we talked about it. It was hard to see how you could get it in there
Yeah.
without the trees.
Although one of those trees is compromised, as you put it on the site.
Yeah, little damage, but big oaks.
Yeah, big.
And there's quite an elevation change of soil that would have to get removed. I think it'd be on the well.
So,
I think we're
yeah, I think
building
we're
on the
pretty
well.
close, if not on it, yeah.
I had one other comment while we were out there, and
Observation?
or one other observation as we were out there, and that is that currently, and you obviously can't tell from this, but currently the driveway is paved all the way to the bluff line. And my thought on that was, the reason for having the building further from the bluff line is to direct water off the bluff line. Would you say that's correct, or is it? I mean, obviously, it's to minimize like erosion, because of the construction and that kind of thing is damaging. But my thought process was, well, if you move the garage forward and you maintain that paved area behind it, you're going to actually create water flowing the other direction, which is, as the engineer mentioned, he would rather it flow to the west.
To the street. yeah.
to the street. So it appeared to me, if they design it as they've said they're gonna design it, which is with a shed roof only sloping towards the driveway, actually moving the garage back would create more of a flow of the water away from the bluff and down the driveway.
That makes sense. If
No,
you-
but
can you go to-
I haven't been out
Yeah,
there.
can you go
Yeah.
to the number, the page that is the pencil drawing?
It would be the other direction.
It's page 12.
And right now, the driveway parking area actually crowns,
I'll show you.
Yeah, and
so there's a significant,
a good portion of the driveway, where the driveway would sit as she proposed it, is slanted towards the bluff.
So if this is where they originally proposed it, and you proposed sliding the garage up the driveway. Well, this driveway, like they said, and right on the property line, is essentially paved along the property line, and that is correct, that is paved, and this retaining wall here, it's actually paved up to that retaining wall. And then this entire area between the house and this, where the garage would be, is paved currently. The shed, like you had mentioned, right now, the driveway right about here, everything about here runs down, everything else runs this way. So there is a fair, because this is all impervious, there's a fair amount of water that sheds to the bluff line, creating what could potentially be erosion on the bluff line. If, like you were mentioning, if they do that whole shed roof, pitched to the west, pitched down the driveway, the highest part of the roof would be on this end or near it if they did a little slant the other direction. But all the water from this garage is now shedding, basically 100% of the area that was shedding this way is now shedding the correct direction away from the bluff line. So I think that actually, like you had mentioned, it's going to help with erosion because it's not going to send water in that direction. I think these two trees, this is a very large tree. This tree might need to be removed because of the closeness there, but I guess this is the more compromised tree. I would not want to see that tree gone. And if you slide this way, I think this corner is going to be on the well, and this tree would have to go. If we slide it up to where you were suggesting.
If we slide it 20 feet that way.
Yeah. Because I have some pictures and I sent them to you. I could show you on the phone, but that well is not far off of the driveway in this retaining.
It's right where your finger was, right there. Yeah.
So what's the purpose of the restriction from the bluff line? Is it erosion, or is it visual, or is it, what is
It's
it?
mostly to avoid any disturbance
Preservation, right?
with on the bluff or within 20 feet of it, to try to avoid disturbance, and the reason is erosion and, potential damage to the wall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So more
It's
slowing
already
down the
in-
flow of water,
What?
more slowing down the flow of water.
And to slow the water down, depending on what the drainage is, yeah.
because it's already impervious, and there's a retaining wall.
Yeah, but if they can build a garage, they're gonna have to tear up that pavement.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
they're gonna have
So-
to have an impact.
But there's not a natural bluff area by the bluff right now.
A natural area by the
Right.
bluff, right, yeah.
It's already-
It's already disturbed.
Yeah, well, I'm not, the building isn't 3 feet from the street
Which,
where's the well at?
It's about on that line, on the
It's
west
right about-
line as we're looking at
probably
it.
here.
I don't think it's
It's actually on the inside of this tree.
And your finger's in the street there, Travis.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
Oh,
Well, this is
sorry.
not the
I mean,
scale.
No.
that's not,
But
okay, so this is not the
Sherry's
scale.
wondering.
I was like,
It's
how
in the street,
is
what's
the
the
garage
problem?
gonna be on top of the well if it's in the
It's
street?
it's about 3 feet off the driveway, is all.
Yeah, it's about here then.
Do you know how far it is from the street?
I would have to guess probably 15 feet.
Yeah, difference between the street
15
and the
to
road
20.
right away.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, for others, I'm perfectly willing to let you all change it. The problem gets to be, technically the bluff impact zone is supposed to be kind of a sacred no disturbance area.
Okay.
Now,
Does that include impervious, like driveways too?
mhm.
Oh, man.
I mean, 'cause-
But if her driveway is already there,
You're not increasing the impervious.
you're not increasing the impervious.
And you're actually
so that's-
improving the shed.
And hopefully, if you can use a roof line or gutters or whatever, you can improve that. So maybe it's a rationale that it can be that close to the bluff because it's already been disturbed and it's already impervious.
And here's another, I guess, kind of argument. I had asked the homeowner while we were out there, that whole kind of driveway paved area between where the proposed garage is and the house, there is a concrete sidewalk, normal sidewalk width, and then from that, and it's on the west side, and then everything from that sidewalk to the bluff line is also paved with asphalt. And at that point, you aren't going to be able to drive a car through the garage, out the side of the garage into the house.
That asphalt is.
So I asked if the asphalt could be removed, and she said that yes, that would be the goal or intention is for that pavement to be removed. So you could actually be improving the pervious surface along that bluff line by decreasing the square footage of impervious
Yeah, quite a bit.
by quite a bit. That's a considerable amount of pavement.
I know we're not
So
here.
how far would the garage be from the bluff line?
Well,
5 feet.
How
well,
far?
I, on their proposal,
Well, I could try.
at least where they had the cones laid out, it was right on the bluff line. So I think it should be right,
Well, just
off,
one corner.
off the bluff a
Yeah.
bit,
Here's
but
One corner.
One corner was 2 feet.
Yeah, even if
You
we
get to
could
the
move
other
it.
corner, it's
I mean,
about
it
8.
5 or
feels like
10
it
feet
needs to
from
be
that
at least
instead of-
10 feet from the bluff line, don't you think? So, just so that during construction and stuff.
yeah,
you're
that it
not-
doesn't get, it
Yeah,
doesn't
you,
get.
you had paced
Yeah,
out, somebody
so,
paced out like 10 feet.
Doesn't-
Chris did, paced out 10
You
feet.
paced out 10?
Yeah.
And where did the west end come to? Right around where the trees were, or what?
Yeah, about probably that first tree. Maybe
So
not
it's-
quite that far.
So if the sort of middle point is that it's 10 feet from the bluff line,
Won't work.
it's then 25 feet from the street. It saves the bigger, healthier tree. It,
At 10 feet, it might not,
It might
I think.
not.
Yeah, it might not
Well,
at 10 feet.
But there had been, by the way, on site visits, am I allowed to discuss or do I have to observe because I'm not on the planning commission? So
Discuss
because
away.
I had brought up 5 feet might be a decent compromise.
That's what I
So just to
was-
get behind it for maintenance sake
Yeah.
and that type of thing,
Yeah.
but that was.
It's, I mean, 5 would be,
I mean, you're still getting close to that tree, which that tree may have to come down anyway.
it's got a lot of roots. I mean, if you do a
5
slab
feet
grade.
works good with the watershed, eliminating most of that watershed going towards the lake.
How
the
far?
bluff. 5 feet.
5 feet does.
If we got 10 feet, a lot of water is still going over the bluff.
Yeah.
Sure, because
Whereas
of the pavement,
5 feet with the overhang, let's assume the overhang's 16 inches or 24.
Oh, on that back side, probably be 16, yeah.
So we're only down to, 3 feet plus of
of
watershed
water
towards
that's
the
going
bluff
that
at
way.
that point.
Yeah.
so 5 feet from the bluff line, use gutters and leaders and the roof design to bring the water
Yeah.
to
She
the
wouldn't-
west.
She wouldn't
Yeah.
need gutters because it's a shed roof.
Okay.
All the flow is towards the street.
Towards the
So
street.
it's gonna-
It's just one roof plane.
So the condition would be that it has a shed roof.
Yeah.
Sloping to the west,
Yeah.
right?
You know, I
That would be
think-
the condition.
Or gutters that take it that way.
Or gutters that take it that way. And
Yeah.
I think that the intention was to match the house, which is as far as 70% of the roof, say, from front to back would shed that direction. 30% or 20% of the roof would shed forward, and that
No,
would
he
be-
actually said they weren't gonna do that little
I think it's gonna
angle on the
match.
backside.
We could maybe ask them.
Did you say that you were not gonna match the angle on the backside of the house?
I guess
I
that's
would
up
like
to
to.
her.
I would like to match the whole.
Match the whole thing.
So the front
So
would
then
be
you would
the-
have to
It'd
be
just be a
gutters.
small clip.
The front
on
would be
back.
dog-eared on the front,
Yeah.
and you just have to.
Okay. So
Gutters
that
on
would
Yeah,
that would
that's different.
take away a little bit of the of the benefit of.
But that can be guttered and pulled back.
How could you gutter that if it's straight? It'd have to be guttered. Well, I guess
You gutter along the bluff
along the
line.
back and then
Side.
point it that direction.
Okay,
Yeah.
so 5 feet from the bluff line, a shed, are we now not talking about a shed type roof? We're talking about a gable roof with
No.
gutters.
Shed roof.
Well, it's not entirely shed. Shed roof would
Gable
be
roof
just
is-
straight flat, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's small, it's still a gable.
Mhm.
It's a,
So it's a gable roof with gutters and leaders to take the water to the west. And did you take a look at the side lot line? Did 5 feet seem doable?
Yeah, it's pretty close. It's pretty close.
4 feet would be better.
Yeah, I'd say 4 would be.
So the neighbor had 4 feet, we can probably do 4
Four.
feet.
Okay.
If it's less than that, I don't know how you ever paint the thing or whatever
Yeah.
without standing in your neighbor's yard.
Yeah, and even if the current neighbor is okay with it, there will
Everybody
be
might
a new
not
neighbor
be.
at some point.
Someday. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so 4-foot side setback on the rationale that it's similar to the neighbor. Everybody okay with that? As a-
yeah. I
And
think
then we have a condition that the existing bituminous between the house and the proposed garage be removed and put in turf.
Except for a
Yeah.
walkway.
Except for the sidewalk.
Or put an impervious surface. I mean, pervious.
Pervious.
Whether it's turf or
Yeah.
green garden.
Don't put it around.
I think that's the best spot for the garage because
That is
the more I looked at it, you move it toward the street. The more you move it toward the street, increases the pitch of the driveway coming into the garage. It makes it very steep unless you dig the garage down.
Yeah,
And then you have to have stairs to get out of the garage to get to the house. So,
No, their location's the best for sure.
Yeah.
For it.
Okay.
It's thought out.
Yep.
Sliding it 2 feet in one direction or another, I don't think is going to make a huge difference. Honestly, when you take out the second tree, the smaller tree, I think you could slide it around 2 feet.
Even with how I have it, I have to take that tree out. I mean, if I have company over, I mean, it's the retaining wall is this tall, you know, even to get anyone, you know, even to be truthful in case of fire or anything, to be able to get in and out. I mean,
With the
the
garage.
closer I am to
with
the
garage
street,
there. Yeah.
the harder it is for anyone to come, or if anything happened, you know, to even get out of the home. It's, I mean, the cabin is set up so kind of, well, the whole lot's kind of funky,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, the alternative is if we need more walkway over there, instead of a 16-foot wide garage for one car, it's a 12-foot wide garage for one car. And then you have more room to get by. And the tree is less of an impact.
Yep.
I mean, that's an alternative, but if 16 is, I mean, because the car is 8 foot wide and the door is 8 or 10 foot wide.
I'd like
So-
to make a motion.
Well,
yeah, you guys
Just-
ready? 5 feet?
I am.
but are we good on the 4 feet for the
That's what
for
a
the
motion
side
would be.
setback?
That's what my
You're
motion
going
would
to
be.
do 4 feet on the motion? Okay.
I recommend approval of the variances with a 5-foot distance between the bluff line and the east edge of the garage. And a 4-foot side yard setback. And that the existing bituminous between the proposed garage and the house be converted to a pervious surface.
And then also that the roof needs to have gutters and leaders to take the
Direct the
drainage
water
toward the
to the
street.
west.
So we have to have a second, and then we have discussion.
I'll second.
Okay, so we can, sorry.
Okay. Is a second? Okay.
Chairperson.
Any further discussion? Did you want to say something else?
No, I think
Okay.
that's,
So, can I ask a question? How, property line, cut and dry, get a surveyor out there, figure that out. How do we define a bluff line point?
Same way with the surveyor looking at the grades and deciding where the break is of 18%.
18%. So
Well,
it'd be
then-
really,
it's really right at the end of
It's the retaining
It's really
wall,
right at
isn't
the
it?
end of the pavement, the retaining wall.
Yeah, I mean, I
You
think
don't
in
need a
this case,
survey.
it would just be the retaining wall.
no, she's not.
so 5 feet from the retaining wall.
I got it.
essentially.
It would be probably a good idea for them to establish where the property line is between them and their neighbor, though. I mean, the bluff
Yeah.
line is pretty well defined, but the property line between them and the neighbor, the fence is there, but
it may not be
But it
right
may
on
not
the
be
line.
right.
Beyond
They
the
have to
property
pull-
line.
They have to get a building permit, correct?
yeah.
And it'll show all that.
The building permit will show.
Well, they'll,
Will it not?
No.
they
They don't
would,
need a
no,
survey
they
to
would
get
need to get a
building.
survey for that side property
They don't need a
line, and I
plat.
think
Or
that
figure
would,
out another way to get it. yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the neighbor had it surveyed at some point and somebody cannot come out there and mark it based on the,
Yeah.
if they're willing to accept that.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you're this close to a property line, you would really
Yeah.
not want your garage to be ending up on the
other
neighbor's
property.
When actually the
property.
neighbor did have it surveyed, I mean, if you look at, you know, what we have in this submittal, I mean, you've got the points, at least here
Sure.
and down there, so.
Okay.
Seems like a surveyor
Should be easy
could come
to
out and
identify.
mark that.
Yeah,
Do we know whose fence it
it's hers, we think,
is? Is it your fence?
but.
Yes, I think it's my fence.
So then
But-
the odds are that it could be any, I mean, the fence is probably on her property at least
Probably.
6 inches.
But
But-
some people, you know, make sure their fence is 2 feet off the property line to.
So they may have
Right,
more
there may be
than,
more.
I mean,
Exactly.
they may have more space than, I mean,
Exactly.
if
That's
that
my point.
fence may not be the property line, it may be 2
Right.
more feet over, so their 2-foot spot where they've got may be the 4 feet already.
Sure.
Right, so,
So,
so
yeah.
they should be able to, you know, use the neighbor's survey to have
Yeah.
a surveyor come out and mark the property boundary, but I would say you'd wanna do that. And
It's
then
advisable.
the building inspector can verify that it's put 4 feet off the property line.
Should we suggest that as a condition, to have
Yeah.
them mark at least have a surveyor mark the property lines?
Yeah,
That'd be nice, just in case.
It's just-
Can
it's
I
wise.
just use the neighbor said that he had it surveyed and I have a pretty current survey, can't we just find the pins? I really am
That's-
on a
that's a
super
good-
tight budget.
Yeah, that's what you would do, is you would call
Yeah,
the
I
surveyor.
I don't
do this
have
for a
to-
living for
and-
30 years, all I have to do is find the
I don't have to
items.
get an actual
We're good to go.
surveyor out
Any-
there?
That's not what we're
Really?
suggesting, we're just saying it
Oh.
needs to be marked.
Okay,
And that's just for your own,
yep, I
Like,
agree with that.
that's just
Yep.
good advice.
I thought, I was hearing that I had to get a surveyor out now.
Yeah.
Okay.
If there's pins there.
Thank you.
No, I'll find a pin.
Okay.
okay. So there's been a motion and a second?
and then the one other condition is that they need to combine the 2 parcels.
Yeah,
Keeping
Yeah.
that in, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Does anyone know how to go about doing that? Do I just go to?
Just go to the county.
You would, Brenda?
It's a pretty easy process. Just,
Okay.
and they're the form you'll fill out, and it's not a very hard thing to do.
Okay, perfect.
It's the county surveyor, property records and survey office.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we've had a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. So that'll go to the city council at their next meeting, which is, I think, 2 weeks?
A week from tonight.
A week from tonight.
And that's, all right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, and that brings us to the discussions, which are the development code regarding the park dedication requirements. Fun.
Yeah, park dedication is always entertainment. So the city council was looking over some of your past approvals and their past approvals, and had some questions about why some people were not required to pay park dedication. And there were 3 examples they picked out. One was an outlot. I think you guys will remember that. It was on a recent one on a lake, and there was an outlot that the guy said would not be developed. Another one was a minor subdivision that created a new vacant parcel and a parcel with an existing house, and we only required park dedication on the new parcel. And then there are 3rd examples. There is an exemption in state law and in your ordinance that if someone creates a 20-acre parcel with at least 500 feet of road frontage, they don't have to go through the typical subdivision process and the costs associated with that. They can just use a surveyor, get the lot surveyed, and go have it recorded at the county. I don't know where that came from. It's been there for a long time, and I think it's largely for agricultural interests so that people out in ag parts of the world don't have to go through this subdivision process. As Neil has pointed out, in Scandia, typically the people that subdivide lots like that build a house. They don't end up being agricultural lots. So we put the question to your attorney about whether the decisions in those cases were right or wrong, or whether there was any wiggle room on it. And his comments are in that staff report, And he talks about the basis for park dedication, which is a thing attorneys call nexus. All that means is a connection. A kind of, has to be a causal link between the park dedication fee you're requiring and what the new development is actually causing in terms of park demand. And so as he looked at these three examples and whether there was a nexus, a rationale there for park dedication based on new demands on your park system, the attorney concluded outlots that say no development, you can't take a park dedication fee for. If the guy decides in the future to develop that lot, then you could, but not at this point. There's no rationale for it. He said the same thing where someone's subdividing and there's a lot with an existing house and then there's a new lot without. You can only charge the park dedication fee for the lot that's going to generate the new demand. The outlier is the 20-acre parcels. And his viewpoint was you guys could change the ordinance. Take out a statement that is in the ordinance right now that says none of the subdivision requirements apply if you create those 20-acre parcels. You could change the language in there and say that these lots need to pay park dedication if you wanted to do that, if you felt they should. So that's a question for you guys to consider, whether you would like an ordinance amendment to come back to you to change that and require people that create big lots like that to have to pay park dedication.
But that is based on state law, right?
No, just the only thing that's in state law is that those lots can be created without some of the typical subdivision process. But the state law does not say anything about park dedication.
Okay.
That's totally up to local units of government.
Can I ask a question right now, or is this still discussion?
No, this.
Yeah, go ahead and.
So, in general, I guess maybe Neil or Brenda, you might know this. How much additional revenue could we bring in a year if we just changed that large lot?
It would vary.
It would vary.
Really
One year
would.
we had a guy do 4. I mean, he was not very far down the Lindengar, and he created 4 lots like that on his, 90-acre
Sure.
parcel, and he didn't pay park dedication on any of them. I don't know how many of them have houses at this point, but some years we've had several, other years it's more a sort of question of fairness, actually.
That's what I was thinking of. It should be,
Yeah.
if they created demand for parks, then
Should add
they
it.
should pay a fee.
Yeah.
So if you build a house on 20 acres, it's the same as building on a 1 acre or a
Right,
half.
of course.
Right.
As far as
Right.
park
Right.
requirements.
Right. So does it come more than with the building of a home versus the division of property?
Typically, it's charged when the subdivision is created, and the person has to pay it before the final Mylars are signed off by the city.
Yeah.
Now, if the guy wants to pass it through in the cost of the land to his buyer,
That's,
that's
Well, it
his.
sounds a little like cart before the horse.
But we don't have any way.
Sure.
I mean,
You don't have any way of tracking going backward. It's always been the standard.
Yeah.
And I know just across the river in Wisconsin, they changed state law that makes it payable at time of building permit.
That
Which creates that
That makes more
relationship.
sense.
That
But
makes a lot
that,
more
it's called an
sense.
impact fee over there.
Wisconsin's right for a
But-
second?
But in this instance,
Well, they're
this is what you're living
different.
with, is you have a history of using subdivision as the trigger.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me because,
Subdivision?
well, yeah, that makes a lot more sense to me than if you're building a house. Because, for one, to me, it should be the person that is subdividing it, not the person building the home. And also, it would discourage willy-nilly subdividing. Not very much, but it would help.
How many people do you think willy-nilly we aren't even letting willy-nilly subdivide?
On a 20-acre lot you are. So all you have to do is go down and report it. So if it's gonna cost you an extra $2,000 to do it, you might think twice about it. So that's just an added incentive.
Fine, Dan, you're right.
No, I'm just saying it's just an added,
Good
it's just
point.
an added,
No, that's a good point.
So you guys want to next time see a an ordinance amendment that would require the guys on the 20-acre parcels to do park dedication.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Fair is fair, right?
Okay.
Another question I had was about the outlot section. Is there a way that the person could create an outlot to avoid paying the fee and then
But then you
change it?
couldn't build on the outlot. When you went to plat that outlot, you're platting a lot, which means you're going through the subdivision process.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so even if even if that outlot ends up being one individual lot,
Mhm.
and they're just building one house on it, it would still have to be platted.
Right.
Yeah, it would have to come
You know,
back.
and
Okay.
the one thing in here that, is interesting because, when you look at the calculations where it says, cash in lieu of dedication, you can have a land and cash combination. And the reason I reference that is, it's something we'll probably see this year is they're looking at finishing off the Tigavo development.
Mhm.
And there were 3 outlots that will then become 7 lots.
Yeah.
Okay, but the development agreement already provided saying that it's probably just because of the parkland dedicated, those lots when they're created are going to pay $1,500 per
Okay.
lot. But that's part of the whole original development
Yeah.
agreement.
And they've dedicated park land.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. And that's public parkland?
They dedicated, I think there is potential for public trail in there.
Okay.
It's something, I think what your ordinance, it's something like a quarter of it has to be accessible to the public, or it's not all of it, but a part of it. If they wanted to get all the bonus units, they had to make some of it at least accessible to the public.
Some of the parkland. Okay. I thought it said that it couldn't be privately held. Any of it. I thought that's what I read
Isn't like
today.
some of the lake stuff there, isn't that private to their development?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I think like the sort of marina thing they have on the lake and stuff, I think that's private.
Okay.
I think it's posted that way.
Yeah. So the other question from the council is, there's a sentence in your park dedication ordinance that says a developer may request a deviation from the presumptive requirements for park dedication based on the anticipated impact of a subdivision. And the council members were in favor of taking that out, not giving developers a clue that they could try to get exempted from park dedication. Cities have typically put that in an ordinance so that if somebody was developing assisted living units, they could ask for a break.
Mhm.
Most developers know
That they can.
that they
offer
can
rate.
ask for a break.
They're gonna ask for a deviation.
So there may not be any real need to have this flexibility statement in the ordinance, and it may just open the door.
Well, if you look at it, and the way it's written now, and it's up there, if you lopped off the yellow, you still have that sentence with regard to deviation, maybe consider development for affordable housing, low to income moderate, or you could probably add
Or
assisted living or
Disabled
something to that effect,
or
yeah.
whatever, yeah. So, anyway, the council was in favor of amending this part of the ordinance to take out that flexibility statement and not even open the door. Are you guys good with that?
I am good. I am. What are you
Yeah.
guys? Yes. And what about adding the addition of the assisted living facility
Yeah,
on
we
that
could
last
add
line?
Yeah, we could add
That
the
seems to make
assisted
sense to
living.
me. I don't know.
And then the last thing, as long as we were looking at this, we thought you could take a quick look at the ordinance and see if anything else needed to change. Neil did a quick survey of your neighbors to see what their park dedication fees are, just to see, we haven't recalculated this for probably 8 or 9 years now. But what he found on that table that's included with this part in your ordinance is that your neighbors, like Hugo charges $2,400 per unit, Forest Lake $2,500, Lindstrom $2,250, and Chisago City $1,900. Yours is $3,000. It's a little higher. It's probably not that much different from Forest Lake, that it would discourage someone from developing in Scandia and have them develop in Forest Lake instead. But it's good to kind of know where your neighbors' fees are.
Well, I think one of the things in here that, is interesting, and, it doesn't come up often, is that the ordinance also provides that for the park dedication is 5% of the value of the subdivision. So it is an election. It's like if you don't want to go through the computation or proving the value of the subdivision, you can just say, I'll pay $3,000 a unit and, you know, be done with it.
Okay.
Because a lot of developers would rather do that. They'd rather just do that up front rather than having to hire an appraiser
Yeah.
and get all the appraised values and then argue with the city about it. They'd
Because it
rather
really
just
is
know.
as written. It's a developer's option, which route they want to go.
Okay.
Right. So if you guys are still okay with that, I just wanted you to kind of know where your city
Yeah.
was at versus your neighbors.
Yeah, that-
Otherwise,
yeah, that
somebody
makes
could
sense.
recalculate again. Typically, what changes those values is changing land values. So if for some reason you felt that in the last few years, land values had either gone way up or way down in Scandia, it would be a time to recalculate this.
Well, they've gone up, so if anything, we need to raise it.
Well, and
So,
that's
yeah, which-
another question.
Yeah,
But as far as looking at your neighbors, you're
yeah. Still high.
still in a,
Yeah.
you know, relatively a similar ballpark, but a little high.
Which seems to make sense.
Those-
Be it-
We'll leave it with that.
I question where, it's a sidebar conversation, where that money is going and how well it's being spent and.
It goes into a special fund, and it has to be spent on expanded or new park facilities. It cannot be spent on maintenance. There was an actual legal case, quite a famous one, involving the city of Egan, where Egan was trying to use developer fees to do maintenance on roads and trails. And the Minnesota Supreme Court said, absolutely not. If you're charging a developer, it has to be for new facilities that are required to serve the new
Population.
population.
Yeah, okay.
So you can't be using your park fees to replace equipment that's worn out or do
I know.
regular maintenance or whatever. It has to be for expanded things or new things.
So on the other hand, if you expand to the point where you got too much parkland, and it's very expensive to maintain it.
It is a balance. And there are cities, Newport is one of them, where people have donated significant amount of parks over time. The Bailey family has donated a large amount of parkland in that city, and it is now a real burden on that little city to maintain it. But once you've accepted it as parkland, it's almost impossible
Can't
to
sell it.
change it back
Yeah,
to anything else
yeah.
by state law. So it is a real balance to think about how much do you create, how much can you maintain with your ongoing resources, because you can't use park dedication for that maintenance.
So what
Yeah, in answer to your question though, Travis, you know, right now, the parking lot at Lillieskogan, the park fund borrowed money to do that. So any development fees we're getting are using to repay that internal loan. So we, you know, I think the park fund has a negative balance of, I don't know, $20,000 plus. So, you know, we just haven't had the development fees come in. Hopefully sometime in the future, they will have some money, additional funds for park development.
Do you have any,
Go ahead.
do you have any idea, Neil, on where we stand as far as park maintenance and?
I mean, we have a number of undeveloped parks. I mean, the parks that we have, you know, we don't, there's a 12-year-old park plan, but I mean, we really, in terms of what's actively maintained is really, you know, around here in the ball fields. And, you know, some at Lillieskogan, you know, but we haven't had funds to implement a Lillieskogan plan. We have a number of other parks that are, you know, pieces of land that are parks that have been dedicated to the city that are really undeveloped for lack of funding.
Good to know.
So I will bring back to you next time some amendments to the ordinance to change it so the 20-acre parcels need to pay park fee, and to take that flexibility thing out of the ordinance, but suggest a couple more folks in that last sentence that might be eligible for some flexibility. Does that work for everybody?
Cool, perfect, yeah.
When did we say the shoreland ordinance was gonna have a public hearing? Is
April.
that April?
I
So,
always skip the
should
month.
we be trying to get that ordinance out to the lake associations, like by the beginning of March, so they have some
Probably.
time to look at it?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
I think they have an annual meeting at the end of this month.
The 28th?
Of
This month.
February?
Yeah, the big marine one is.
So maybe I should try to get it to you this week, and you guys could get it to those
That'd be ideal.
guys
yeah.
so that they got it to their meeting. Okay.
Good call.
Right, that brings us to the review of the chapters for the comprehensive plan. Are we?
Ryan?
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair, Planning Commission members, tonight I'm here to just talk about your transportation and water resource section. So let's just start with transportation, as that's just a single, really, individual chapter itself. We don't have a comprehensive, large, mega transportation section, you know, pretty straightforward in that section. Projections, growth, or traffic projections are done through the county in reference back in the transportation analysis zones, and they really aren't showing any increase in projected traffic between now and 2040. Thus, basically, the transportation plan is staying as is. Things to highlight, though, that I think are in motion. Obviously, the city has adopted a capital improvement plan and have actually been implementing that in the last couple of years, with a larger project coming this year to handle almost 12 miles of roadway. And then some additional crash data has been brought in, as obviously since 10 years ago, a lot of that stuff didn't quite exist to the level it does now. Obviously it's a couple years older, but that's what's published. So that's stuff that can be updated through time. And then, you know, some of the goals that are outlined, you know, primarily deal with and show and represent on page 6 and 7 of the chapters, basically your missing links. How can you improve your network with the extension if subdivisions came in this area with a proposed? This would guide those developers on where you guys are wanting some of those connections to. Obviously, it would help for local traffic. It will certainly help on emergency response issues and or provide two ways in and out if sort of happen a tree were to fall down and block the passageway.
Is that current? I mean, I know you said that's from the 2030 plan, but I can identify at least one there where you will never get a connection because it goes across headwaters, and they will not be building a road there. The one that goes on Meadowbrook, that one shouldn't even be on there.
The west-east one?
Yeah, the subdivision that was approved for that
That
was
would-
never built, that actually connected over to here.
I own property that's adjacent to that, and those are headwaters where that goes through, where that's circled.
Right, but
They will never build
if
a-
you follow the cursor, there's a subdivision that was approved, and maybe,
Right.
maybe Ryan can adjust that.
Okay, but I'm just saying where that particular oval is,
Right.
that would not go there.
Are you talking about the top oval or the lower one?
The lower one.
Okay.
So the oval should shift to
Yeah,
the
it should be,
east.
it should be to
Shift
the
to the right.
east. Where what you're referring to, I think that's where they identified it 10 or 15 years ago, but.
That's great feedback, thank you. Some other areas that I believe you floated around the EDA, a couple other particular areas in town. I can just get up there. One area I would suggest to incorporate into your plan.
Yeah, so.
Did you go northeast?
Here?
Let's go
Go
north.
north of downtown?
Well,
or-
let's stay there so my eyes can focus.
All right.
So here's Olinda. To bring something through here to allow development in here. Most certainly probably not going to get anything improved by MnDOT's on future 97 connections. MnDOT's always looking for access closures when possible. So, but there was a network that was kind of outlined in this area, but I just think showing, lining up with particular roads would certainly guide a developer if any of the open space was proposes in development, and I believe that's within the zoning area that's been expanded, Neil.
Right, I think, for.
Potentially.
The comp plan, I think where we looked at, expanding the village neighborhood district, and for the designation as a rural center was this area in here. Some of it would be try to, establish where would you put roads in the future to develop around. And, they're hypothetical, they're just like the orange blobs on the paper, but trying to get some connectivity so you really create a neighborhood.
So this intersection 2, which is Oak Hill, Highway 97, MnDOT, and then Oak Hill or County Road 52, Washington County. So you got 3 local or players in there. I think it'll be important to identify that area as a potential future study. Ultimately, we would want MnDOT to lead something like that, as MnDOT has done a significant study through Forest Lake from 61 to Manning. As things continue to develop, obviously then they'll finish that study probably in 95 to make it comprehensive. But if we do see, growth, or if some, the school does have more enrollment over in the future, that area obviously is a dangerous intersection with the skew like that exists there. A number of years we have submitted comments in the CIP to Washington County when we have the ability to. It's hard for them to address this particularly because MnDOT's the road authority, and that would have to be led by MnDOT. But everything else that we've placed with comments in Washington County, they've been pretty proactive on most of the stuff.
Do you have any information on whether the county or the state are thinking of any roundabouts along 97?
So a couple of years ago, Washington County applied for a cooperative agreement to construct a roundabout at Manning in 97.
That's one that
That was not successful. However, again, we still provided comments on intersection improvements there, or even at minimum, look for some low-cost, high-benefit improvements now, so you can allocate the funding or find the funding for future larger improvements, such as lighting. You'll come through there at night, and I actually think they did replace that one light with an LED or something, because it is brighter than it was not over a year ago.
Not everyone who drives through that intersection is bright enough, though. That's part of the problem.
So a teeter-totter
that
we play when we make these requests.
Yeah.
We don't want to bring more costs back to the city, whether it's electrical costs, because there is pretty straightforward, clear policies on stuff like that. If you recall, a few years ago, the city worked very successfully with Washington County taking the lead on a project at Lofton in 97. The city had no local share in that project, and you got intersection lighting there, and the county has agreed to pay for that. So that was a perfect case scenario of an intersection improvement that had a lot of bad sight distances, maybe one light if it even shined the whole intersection, before what they have there today. So those are the things that we've tried to promote case by case with working with Washington County and MnDOT. Also, MnDOT came through a few years ago and did some of what they refer to as mumble strips through 97 to minimize the crossover on 97 instead of the typical rubble strip that's much deeper and has a higher frequency noise that's projected off to the side properties. These mumble strips produce a lot less lower frequency, but give you the same effect as a driver. And I've actually had the ability to go out to the MnDOT road test and sit in a car and and stand beside it when they drove by. So huge difference, but really as a driver you get the same effect to try to minimize any of that crossover traffic or distracted driving that's been so much more common on 97. So that's a lot of the highlights. I mean, traffic projections are relatively where they're going to be as projected, and the county takes the lead on all those and basically breaks the community into zones, and then within those zones there's a demographics, employment information that translate into vehicle trips and origins and destinations. That's all then run through a computer model that's Washington County or regional. So it's not just something really little. And then City of Scandia does not do this at any schedule. I'm completing traffic counts on local roadways, but Washington County and MnDOT at least every 2 years do road counts on theirs, and that's all public information. We could go to MnDOT's website right now and look all that up if you guys ever need that information or want that. so.
Going back to the goals and policies section at the beginning of this, I was wondering if we could add in some kind of discussion or goal or policy that would discourage the massive excavation when building roads. If there are new subdivision, I'm talking new roads, obviously not these trunk highways and stuff like that, but discourage like straightening the roads out is where I'm going with this, and allowing the roads to kind of follow the curvature of the land and also minimize impact on water features or whatever you want to call them. Is there, I mean, what do you think about adding in a policy like that? What do you think about
I think it's already in there. If you read this goal, it says establish context-sensitive roadway design standards. I think that's what you're looking at.
And to get specific on those standards, you guys have a whole set of documents that are over here that include the city standard, road standards, and then goes through each material type, minimum grades and stuff like that, radiuses at corners. And then in the development code, you have a whole other series of road requirements. So there's 2 spots right there that we use those documents when developers come to town and talk. You know, our section's pretty straightforward, 24-foot road, depending on what vehicle use will be there. The depth will vary, but construction limits would be the same. It's a sand section, class 5, and 2 lifts of bituminous.
Okay. But where I'm getting at is the design of the actual road itself. I mean,
the alignment.
The alignment of the road. Thank you. I'm not talking about like how they build it, but because I don't know anything about that stuff. But as a goal and / policy, I think it might be beneficial in my way of thinking to add in something that would encourage less excavation and less impact on the environment, and encourage more natural flow of roads and less, which would therefore have a lower impact on watershed issues.
So right away, when you guys have the opportunity to meet with the developer, and what we typically do on a large site development, we'll sit down and just have a preliminary meeting, talk about kind of the goals of the city, the requirements and that, and if that's certainly the direction that the city wants to move and have more curvature in roads, that's what you would imply to the developer to then bring me a concept plan to show that, right? At the end of the day, the developer's going to try to maximize his site with as many lots as possible, and if he can do that by curving a road, certainly he's going to propose that. Watershed rules are very much stricter than they were when you guys saw your Big Bang of development. The only body that really had to fulfill watershed rules was Tigabo. Now everybody before that had the general MPDS permits, you got a pond somewhere maybe, Nowadays, they come in, they look at all the impervious area you're proposing and planned unit development, and then look at that, and then you're gonna have to treat back to basically pre-existing conditions, which is very strict, and they're gonna have rate volume control and deal with all your nutrient reduction. So with all that, then that infrastructure in a site development would become public infrastructure if that's still the policy the city moves forward with. So you would then be accepting those improvements at the end of the construction period or fulfillment of what's outlined in your development agreements. Then you would accept that as public infrastructure. But I'm just, like all the developments before Tigabo, they don't have these stormwater. They just let it run down the ditch and right into a wetland.
Right, and that's the issue that I'm bringing up.
But that's all permitting requirements controlled by the watershed, the DNR, the TEP panels, which consist, Washington Conservation District, the Corps. All those people are players now in these subdivisions.
Okay, so
you guys got buffer requirements, setbacks.
Right. But so are you telling me that if, well, I guess I'm still sticking with, I think this should be considered as part of the comp plan. And the reason I say that, especially the excavation portion of it, or maybe I'm saying it wrong when I say excavation. I mean, like,
You mean the alignment?
the alignment of
Which
the
is
road.
what I think you need to say a little bit about what that term context-sensitive
Yeah,
design
that's
means.
what I was waiting
because
for that opportunity.
That is what that means. The
Okay.
policy that's in there that says it should be context-sensitive, that normally means it should be sensitive to the existing topography. It should be sensitive to views. It should be sensitive to natural resources. That's what that means. And if that's not communicating it, it should be defined a little further in that policy statement maybe, because
Yeah.
that's what that statement
Yeah,
means.
that context-sensitive design has a very specific meaning, and it's exactly what you're saying, Dick.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, but if you look at this and it says it for, you know, for low-traffic roadways, you know, which would make sense, that, you know, for roads that you don't want to have, you know, context-sensitive may not work well for 97, 95,
Sure.
somebody with that volume.
Yeah.
But a residential street that gets a couple hundred cars a day, that winds around, a la Tagava would be a context-sensitive design street.
Yeah.
You know, they follow the terrain of the road instead of going straight through. And I think that's what you were trying to get at.
Yeah.
But when I read that statement, that's exactly what it tells me.
Right.
Okay.
So it
Even
probably
then-
just needs to be expanded a little bit so people could get that out of it.
But even then, I think most designers look at following the contours of the land, even if it's a major highway.
Well-
You don't go through make it a massive cut or a massive fill. You go where it's most economical, and that's most of the time
Is
is following the
with-
contours of the
Right,
land and the
yeah,
natural beauty.
yeah, certainly, I agree with that, but I think that doesn't always happen, it seems like to me. I mean, I look at the developments up in North Branch, and of course, most of those are on farmland, so the grade of the road is straight and flat.
Okay.
But,
So in North Branch, they only have to comply with the general MPDS stormwater permit. There's no watershed rules governing land development up over there,
Really? Why not?
because it's not in a watershed jurisdiction. Just like Chisago City. If I was a developer,
Mhm.
I'd be developing right there versus south of the border of Washington County, Chisago.
Because of the
Just because of
watershed.
stormwater rules is so much different, and economics play out big time.
Yeah, okay. Thi-
Can I ask a question?
I think so.
It's not. But did you have a brief comment about that
Well,
issue?
it's a comment regarding economics, because my experience in Scandia over the last 25 years is that the point that I think Neil made, or maybe you made, that it's more economical for developers to build straight roads because they can sell more lots. So,
Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes it's more lots when it's curved, sometimes
Correct.
it's more when it's
so
straight.
my question,
sure.
because I've heard this argument with regards to variances, if a developer can say, this would prove to be, it would create a deficit in my situation, which is oftentimes the grounds for variances that are approved in this, among the planning commissioners.
Not economical.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
The criteria are, it cannot be an economic reason for approving a variance. State criteria as well as local criteria.
So what's the language that you use? It's not an economic challenge, but when people are asking for a variance, what is the language that's used?
To
They
come-
need
come with
to
the
express
beauty.
practical difficulties, which is
Exactly.
something physical about the site that prevents you from complying with the ordinance.
That the
Like the
landowner did not
location of a
create.
wetland, like location of slopes, like location of an existing septic system. But very specifically in the criteria, it says you cannot grant a variance primarily for an economic reason. So it isn't gonna happen that way. But I think it's a good
It is
point,
a
but
good
I think
point.
it's already taken care of in that policy. It just needs to be expressed in a way that somebody reading it would understand what context-sensitive
Can
design
you
means.
tell me which policy that says that one?
Right here,
Just-
it's right here. It's on the very first thing. It's the second rule.
Protect
Okay,
scenic
establish context-sensitive roadway design and standards that will protect, okay. So the goal is to establish, and the policy is protect scenic rural roads.
viewpoint.
Okay, so maybe we need to add some more policies in there, planning process from a visually intrusive and incompatible development. Narrow and heavily wooded character, okay. well, yeah, okay.
And MnDOT has a definition of context-sensitive design on their website, if that, needs to be in
Yeah, I
a
can
little,
get that out to
in a
everybody. I
box
think it
or
might be
something
helpful.
here.
But-
That would be a useful thing to do, because they define it, and it considers a lot of what you're talking about.
Okay, do you think that definition is broad enough to say that we want it to be?
We'll have Neil bring it forward and put it in a box or something
Okay.
in the plan, and then you can see what it means.
Okay.
But I, from what you've said, I think it counts everything that you're talking about.
Okay, okay.
Can I just ask one more question? Does context sensitive include whether or not to pave a street or not pave a street?
It can. I think that's, more often something that's an engineering standard about amount of traffic. Or about a local decision. I mean, Grant doesn't pave any of their roads because that's their set of values.
thing,
They
yeah.
believe in gravel roads.
Dirty cars.
Gravel roads are just as impervious as bituminous roads.
No,
There's
that's
no
not-
difference.
No, that's not true.
It is
Okay.
true.
I have
Okay.
a gravel road.
It is absolutely true.
All right, okay, all right.
That's science. That's just plain science. So, but the gravel versus paved, that's a whole discussion about what
That comes
What
down
roads
a lot
cost
related to
and-
what finances you might have or maintenance practices in place. Obviously, if you have a road that has 100 cars per day, you're probably not gonna look at the pavements. Maybe you do something more, the city's done calcium chloride for dust control and stuff like that. Other communities have placed reclaimed material on it to harden it up, but over time that gets as hard as a paved road, so then they have to reclaim that back into the ground and reshape it. In Forest Lake, this last year we did on some very low volume roads, because the distance for the grader to get out there and low traffic, but dust was an issue, and the rutting. We did what was a double chip seal. I have presented that to council before, and basically it's 2 thin layers of seal coating material after we've shaped the road and got it hard. Just acts as a waterproof membrane on it. There's no dust or sediment being tracked into the ditches or the water resources along it, but then no grading. So there's those things, but when we start seeing traffic escalate on roads and we can't keep up with the grading, that's when cities around 250 vehicles per day is a rule of thumb. Now, obviously, some of them were built better because remember when the old gravel roads were built, they basically excavated the stuff in the ditches to make the subgrade and put a little bit of gravel on top of it. So you got a road built out of sometimes topsoil and clay. Then you get to an ultimate point sometimes where the maintenance is so bad and the frost boils have just taken over the road that you need to come in and do a road improvement. But those are all things that we would talk about budget seasons and then plan in a capital improvement plan when you get into something that big.
The one question I had about this, and I talked to Neil about this today, is there's a statement in the plan that the city has no on-road or off-road bike trails.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that.
In 2011, we did a bike plan for Scandia, and
I think only one of those,
And-
Sand Lake, has been designated.
Yeah.
So that is the only one that's actually been
That actually
designated by the
exists.
council.
But there is actually a plan, and you might consider
That's actually in our
putting-
Parks and Trails plan.
Is it now
Yeah.
part of that?
Yeah.
So then it will end up in there, and then it could be referenced in that transportation system section, that you do have a bike trail plan, and one of the routes has been designated, and to reference the park and trail plan. Otherwise, you'll get a bunch of comments back from the Met Council about why aren't you doing bike trails?
Right.
I've gotten
The-
3 plans
Is
back
there
so
not
far,
a-
and I'm telling you what you'll get.
The plan would be
Is there
to
not-
attach an appendix, your whole trail plan that you guys.
Yeah, is that gonna be in the park and trail section?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
So I just reference it in the transportation section.
Well, I got 2 questions. One is, what about that bike path that's along 95 and goes into William O'Brien?
Is that a county one that's part
I
of the
think that's
95?
states.
Is that state?
Yeah,
So that,
just
so,
inside.
Oh, coming from the south?
no, it starts at 97, then it goes down to Copus and across 95, basically to William O'Brien, and then runs through William
It
O'Brien.
doesn't exist anymore, John. It was eliminated during the Zaville installation.
I'm sorry?
That road does not, that bike path doesn't exist anymore.
It does further down, not all the way up to
But not, it's
97.
it's no longer running on the east side of 95. It doesn't exist. It was eliminated.
Okay.
It's still there.
It's there, but
It's
it's not
still there,
maintained.
It's not
that-
maintaining any, it's just
Right.
being
No,
left.
no one was
atrophy.
willing to commit to maintaining it.
Okay,
for Wally,
the
he
one,
mows it.
but the part of it that's on the west side of 95, I just rode last September, so I know that exists. So it goes down into the park.
Right.
That could be acknowledged on,
Oh.
is that on the park and trail plan?
No, I don't think it is.
You should probably make sure that it gets onto that plan.
But my other quick
East side
question
of
was,
95?
Because
West.
in
West side.
yeah, it runs along the west side of 95.
because
and
it's
goes
actually
through the
part of
park.
William O'Brien State
West
Park.
side.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's not in the public
You
right of way,
can follow that
it's part of William O'Brien State Park.
Yeah, William
Yeah.
O'Brien's Trail.
Still would be good to acknowledge it. You just will get a bunch of questions from Met Council about why aren't you doing bike planning and planning for multimodal, so I'd acknowledge everything you got or have planned for in your plan.
Well, that's my other question, tangentially here, is how does the, our parks plan that was done 12 years ago, is that being updated, is that being referenced, how is that being used in relation to the new comp plan?
All your stuff will be, at a minimum,
Will that be
attached as an
replacing what
appendix.
was done 12 years ago then, or?
No, it's pretty much the Parks and Recreation Committee. They looked at it and had no changes to what was done.
Okay, so that's just
So it's
continuing as a.
Continuing as is.
Because I worked on that, and it was about 6 or 7 times more work than what we've done on this comp plan. So I was wondering if that was gonna stay or just be tossed aside.
Nope, that's referenced in the plan still.
Okay, that's the
Yeah.
answer to my
So that should
question.
be considered like a moving document. So
Yeah.
you should anticipate, you probably were gonna, a document like that, you're gonna have some revisions in 10 years versus your comp plan. Your
Right.
comp plan's kind of a summary of that, and then
Okay.
it will reference that. So you have the ability to revise that document as maybe you have received some funding, right? Or the Gateway Trail takes off heading even further north up to the Immigrant Swedish Trail through Chisago County, you know? So that's stuff that's a moving
And then that
document,
would
but
just
reference to
update
your
that
comp
every
plan, and you only do your comp plan every 10 years.
One thing that I saw today that I thought was interesting is that May Township, in their open space developments, gives people bonus units if they create easements for the Gateway Trail. And I don't know, does your open space development, does it include something like that? I thought that was interesting that in May Township, a way to get bonus units for cluster development or open space is to dedicate land for that Gateway Trail. I thought it was an interesting strategy. I've never seen anyone do that before. Would that be applicable here? Is there developable stuff along that Gateway Trail?
For the part that the DNR already owns in fee simple or by easement, they already have that. And I
Okay.
think it's not yet been defined. Our plan kind of shows a corridor following Olinda, up to the north to Chisago County, but I don't think they're at the point where they've worked on that.
I don't think that there used to be a map that actually showed potential places for the Gateway Trail. When Moose was on the planning commission, he said it was somewhere between 95 and 35E. But seriously, there was a place, an actual map that showed properties in Scandia that would be potential for Gateway Trail.
I was on the
But,
park committee around 2005, 2006.
Yeah,
And we talked about that, but we was discouraged because we didn't want to freak people out that their land was going to be taken from them for a bike trail. That was one of the big concerns, was we didn't want residents being upset over that.
And I think that's partly why May uses the other option that's kind of a carrot
Yeah,
thing.
it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea myself, but.
You could look it up in their ordinance, how they word it, but I thought it was really interesting that they would give people bonus points in order to get them to dedicate easement for that trail.
Which is the same way we do with Well, no, I guess we require them to do the park dedication. Maybe we could do that in lieu
And
of park
this,
dedication.
and this would be in lieu of park dedication, so they would not only get the bonus units, but then it becomes their
Also,
park
it was,
dedication.
yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
if
Maybe
it
that's
were
something
part
we
of the
should-
gateway, that's a state trail, right?
Mhm.
So
So
the
then that
state
would
would
be
be required to
maintained.
maintain it, not us?
Right.
Yeah, well, there you go. Free trail.
Just a thought.
There is no free
Trail,
trail.
No such thing as a free
What
trail.
state
no
do you
free
live in?
lunch.
Oh, right.
Less costly.
But we need money for the parks,
Right,
because we're in the
Right.
hole.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But to the discussion of not having more parks than you can, maintain.
Get something that somebody else can maintain.
Do we need to have more discussion on that? Or is that something we?
Brian, anything else you wanted to cover on transportation?
Yeah, but to your question, should we add something about should we have a discussion for addition of
I
a?
don't- Yeah, are you talking about? for the
Oh, yeah,
park?
what Sherry was just talking about.
I don't
yeah.
see there being a downside to that.
It
About
could be
getting
in the
bonus
park and
points.
trail part of things where you talk about the gateway trail.
I think
Okay.
we want more parks, and here's one that's gonna
And giving people an incentive to
come through
yeah.
and be essentially paid for by somebody else.
It can't be bad.
If it does, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Right?
is this
You're
where
leaving,
I
you don't
could,
even care.
is this where I could be
First
pedantic
fault.
and point out another typo?
Go ahead.
Sure.
On page 3, it's complement with an E, not complement with an I.
Nice. Well done.
Well,
That's Old English, really.
Compliment.
Old English, okay.
All right. Underwater resources.
I had to get one in tonight, so.
All right. So again, here's where you have a very beefy document behind the comp plan. So obviously the comp plan section is probably much thinner than people would realize, and there has been some changes in the format this year with the Met Council on the comp plan stuff. Previously you had your sections broken out with the natural resources and surface water, and then some other stuff broken out. Moving forward, they've made a uniform water resource section. Tonight we'll just be talking about the surface water, wetland stuff. And then also we'll certainly have within there the wastewater, but that'll be final, depending on some of the land use being finalized, because that is what really will affect potentially sewer service with the Bliss system. The community has 3 systems, city-owned, Bliss, Anderson-Erickson. Obviously, we're pretty much at capacity with Anderson-Erickson. That's been studied and discussed quite a bit, and ongoing discussions there. And then relatively new Uptown system. So I won't expand any more on that stuff at this time until we start narrowing in on final land use stuff and with that. Water supply, I'm just going to hit on that quick because that's pretty straightforward. 99% of the community is private well. There are some privately owned systems. Wild Bush Acres, just the west of here, has a community water system. And then the city has its own hilltop system here that we have. And then moving into surface water, which would be the third category of the water resource. So basically what you guys have in front of you is a summary of what's in the local water plan, and that local water plan is approximately 70 pages of documents and gets very detailed and consists of several figures. And then one of the main goals with the comp plan, and in parallel with Washington County and your local watershed districts, is getting stuff like projects, or not exact projects have to be identified, just vague enough to cover and be uniform. So when we do want to go after grants that have been very successful with our Carnegie Marine and St. Croix district, that then aligns and scores well in those applications in the future. So we've been very successful working with Jim Schaefer in his area over the last years, and have done a number of projects. Sand Lake, was an area that's picked up a lot of drainage coming to the north side. That's some iron enhanced sand filters and infiltration areas there. A very significant improvement off of 197th down the ravine bluff that took a lot of sediment and filled in old wetlands, and then a ravine deep enough that I didn't dare walk into it because you didn't know if it'd cave in on you. So a lot of those areas that staff has been working very closely with the watershed district on moving forward with some improvements. A lot of those improvements to date have been funded primarily by the watershed district with local support on whether it's existing information we might have had or resources on other stuff, but really the bulk of the work's been done by the watershed district. Looking at a lot of stuff in the Goose Lake area, you know, and then they've been involved very heavily with landowners as well. So to try to identify some of that stuff, and simply it might be first step study, because when you do go into a lot of these applications nowadays for trying to obtain grants, you have to show your benefit cost ratio, what's going to be awarded, and those areas that they can then study and work with those landowners more closely then allows them to, you know, do what they need to do to have a successful application. And often some of those times that's when we come to city council to ask for resolutions of support. But within the local water plan, you know, really not too much will change with the bulk of it. Obviously there's a lot of duplication of verbiage. We'll want to cut some of that down so it's more precise and efficient. All the figures will have to be updated with whatever information that's available. Obviously digital information is expanded greatly compared to what was out there previously. Obviously since the last plan too, you're now in the northeast groundwater management area, so that's a significant thing to continue to monitor. Primarily you got two major aquifers in this portion of the area, the Prairie du Chien and Jordan. You know, we are north of the continental divide of those aquifers, so generally if we're not touching those aquifers, that water is draining into the St. Croix River, and therefore, but as you'll hear about those two aquifers of concern down in like the White Bear Lake area, and you know there's a continental divide of that, so there's a directional flow of that. We're not really affected with what's going on down there, but obviously you've probably heard a lot of stuff there. I know there's always the questions about septic tanks and wells. Washington County is in charge of septic tanks. My knowledge, they don't have a list of outstanding or public information that might be available on failed septic tanks, but going through their process and to meet compliance schedule, typically they're required to have those brought into compliance with 18 months once that stuff's identified.
Ryan, they do know where they are, but they won't release the information, because the Met Council wanted to require that in this round of comp plans, that you have a map not only showing all the septic systems, but also the ones that had problems, and the county just flat out refused to provide it. Because they said it changes, because people have to clean them up within 18 months, there's no reason to put it in a 20-year comp plan. And then it has implications for values of people's property and stuff, and so they weren't willing to put it out there.
And since the last comp plan, there's been a lot of improvements with this whole process and documentation on this stuff. So just even after the stuff's getting pumped, you know, documentation's now being corresponded between the county and these private drain fields. So, you know, before that, it was kind of the old Wild West, you know. So again, moving forward, that should certainly help with the natural resources of stuff and being able to identify that stuff. And then, you know, there's a lot of questions about wells oftentimes and how that, you know, might be in contamination. You know, typically it's due to nitrates, you know, in our shallower wells. That can be impacted by a failing septic tank or even farm manure and fertilizers that are used on the lands, you know, stuff like that. Sometimes more rare, but you'll deal with radium and arsenic too. But you know, as private well, you know, as the stuff's being monitored and tested over time, hope to identify that. Obviously, we don't have to be dealing with large industrial, you know, old dumps and flumes of that stuff that's in area. In your local water plan, you do have those areas of sensitivity in relation to your aquifers, so that's pretty well defined. That's stuff when we come in, let's just say a development comes in particular portions of the city, we have to be conscious about whatever storm BMPs that are designed because of the separation of groundwater. Sometimes I've even seen in some communities where they require like a lining in that stormwater pond so it can't infiltrate into the groundwater if you do have very close stuff. So there's a whole set of rules and requirements with the watershed and that kind of stuff that would guide that direction too. So just a lot of things going on with your local watershed that we want to come to a conclusion, so that we're very consistent with what's, like I said, in your local watershed district's plans, your plan, and then Washington County, which is moving forward with the plan too. So that's just a lot of correspondence there and coordination. So so it'll include everything from like your public waters inventory, a number of figures.
In the interest of less confusion and coordinating, I think last May, I think they updated Sylvan to Keewatin. Is that Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
I keep seeing it on the county and the state sites. It's written as 3 different names: the original and Sylvan and Keewatin.
And in your shoreline ordinance, we have the new name. So that table out of the shoreline ordinance with the public waters on it could just go to the comp plan, because it's got
I think we should call it capital.
Well, it gets confusing to people who haven't been following it.
Yeah.
Trying to pick highlights to go out. Some things that changed that didn't really affect Scandia is Rice Creek's not just a very small portion, but Rice Creek and Comfort Lake, Forest Lake did change some boundaries. It's affected more in the southeast of Forest Lake. So really that picked up a large JD ditch to Comfort Lake. So that was something regionally that's changed. There's certainly a lot of effort on maintaining those JD ditches in areas just to continue to maintain volume and the conveyance of the drainage systems, and certainly we'll outline that stuff in potential projects. And sometimes it's just simply as they've scoured and eroded so much too that they just need to sometimes be cleaned out, revegetated, some minor tree clearing of poor trees that you can then allow some sunlight into those banks. A lot of studies have supported that a vegetated drainage soil is better than an open channels soil because of all the scouring then is minimized. And I know Mike Kinney from Comfort Lake is pretty in tune with all those studies and pretty proactive on a lot of that stuff. Other than that, I mean, obviously the mapping is going to be a lot more advanced than 10 years ago, just with what resources have been included or done, studies, and then just the technology of being able to better review the groundwater hydraulic stuff. So, that'll be addressed.
I think that brings up a good, somewhat of a segue. I'm obviously not segueing off of what you're talking about, but we were given a letter. Well, I got it a few days ago, and Neil got it today. And this is from Pam Arnold, and she discusses in this letter, among some things, a lot of the mapping. I don't know if you, Ryan, had a chance to look at that, but I guess we could go through each of the map items that she talks about here and kind of discuss it if we want to. But have you had a chance to look at this at all?
Yep. So in general, just quick summary, there's basically one or two things that mapping would not account for.
Okay.
We don't have data for the rural reserve. And then areas where erosion of concern is, you know, specifically to pinpoint all those are just kind of ongoing areas of review we've done consistently with the watershed district.
Okay.
But, you know.
When you talk about the erosion, do you mean that data is just not really available? Is that what
So, I guess what my understanding of that is areas where erosion is of concern. So obviously I would say Dinosaur Hill, you know,
Okay.
stuff like that. And I would
Yeah.
just put it out on a map.
Yeah, okay.
And those are areas that, you know, the watershed's in tune with and knows about and have done a number of studies or trying to assist with whatever they can. So.
Okay.
But in terms of nobody's gone and done field work and identified every place in town where erosion's an issue.
Okay.
I mean,
There's
nobody-
just a few spots that have been identified
There are
because
places
of
people know
issues.
about because of
Because they're
issues,
significant.
there have been issues there in the past, but there's never been a requirement for watershed districts or cities to go systematically and map everywhere where erosion is a problem.
Okay.
And it would be a significant effort to do that.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Rural preserve, I think that's more of a city decision based on zoning or something along those lines.
Well, actually, no, I mean, that's one thing I suppose you could put in there, because I think the city does hold some conservation easements going way back when.
It depends on what's meant by that term. If someone means it as a land use district that has certain regulations
Yeah,
to try
I
to
think
Now,
preserve.
this is really parcel by parcel. You probably could map those.
What?
You know, a specific parcel where, as part of a subdivision or something else, the city is actually holding a conservation easement.
Well, I think that would refer actually more to the rural preserve
Okay.
as opposed to the rural reserve,
Correct.
which I think
Right,
more
right.
identifies
Okay,
an
I thought you-
area.
I'm sorry, I thought you said
That's
preserve.
more like an area where you'd say, we're gonna have
This
minimum
is
lot sizes
of
of
20 acres or
20
something
acres,
or
and
whatever.
we're-
Yeah. So that would be
Yeah.
more in the zoning thing. But as far as you would think, Ryan, most of these other items would be identified in the mapping that's going to be included in the comp plan.
Yep, so, you know, just starting at one, I think I covered and hit on the septic systems and the contaminated wells. Impacted waters certainly would be having maps showing impaired water maps in the surface water management plan. No data with erosion areas. We'll have certainly the groundwater mapping that's in our current local water plan. And then lake streams, wetlands will all be mapped. You know, we talk about then some areas with previous construction has created environmental and financially cost fixes. I think 197th was an example of that, where the city did a storm pipe outlet, which was a small, you know, when they first started doing rain gardens, you know, so you just didn't have the knowledge at the time. Probably that was constructed somewhere around the early 2000s. And they had a direct outfall down that bank of Dinosaur Hill, which created that ravine over time. And then the watershed came in with that improvement project a couple years ago to correct that area. And certainly working on some other areas where they can improve areas where we just used to have the old pipe discharging out to areas direct drainage into either wetland or a steeper slope. Areas where roads have caused divisions and obstacles. I would say that some of our roadway construction has created lack of thorough roads. I don't know any obstacles to quality of life, but if you guys had any insight on that. Specific occurrences where planning was not able to anticipate regrettable outcomes.
Those are value judgments. You guys would have to say what.
Sure. Well,
It's a little hard.
one that I know about simply because I was told is, like, for instance, Goose Lake, which has been damaged by the development around it. It used to be a viable lake, and now it's not so much anymore.
West or east side?
I don't know, Pam. Can you? The whole lake is in. The whole lake has been compromised based on the development, which I think is on the east side of the lake, most of the development on that lake.
That's
Is
really
that right?
probably, if you talk to the watershed district, it's more compromised by the ag runoff from the west.
Oh.
Yeah,
They're
I would
working on a
say
project there.
They have a large egg runoff that goes right through cattle or whatever, pigs, I don't know what animals they have, then all that flowage comes across Oldfield into Goose Lake, and they've done a number of studies, and they've actually got a lot of momentum with the property owner on potentially coming forward with something here that will improve that area greatly. And, you know, they've been studying that area for a long time and just trying to build that relationship with that property owner so they can do something on their land, potentially on the west side of Oldfield. We looked a little further north where the city owned some land, but again, that groundwater interaction didn't give them the opportunity to do what they needed to do. So some potential positive things to talk about that are coming forward here maybe this year, but I would see something for sure in the next 2 years.
Okay.
So it's not.
Didn't the watershed do an iron filter deal right there though? That was supposed to help quite a bit, or?
I don't think they did anything yet.
Oh,
We talked about it for a number of years and walked it, then when
Iron
they got-
filters at Sand Lake.
Okay.
And the
Well,
north
they
end
were
is-
gonna do it at Goose, but okay.
So, you know,
Does the city like partner with the watershed when it comes to and correct me if I'm wrong, but I am of the opinion, or I have a theory that you know, when we are building roads, we have these infrastructure projects that has a big effect on all the watershed stuff. And so does the city actively connect with the watershed district and whoever the other interested partners are to try and solve some of the issues that are created by the roads, by the existing roads? And you know, as you've mentioned, we've done things in the past that, you know, like the stormwater drain from 2000, where we didn't identify the potential damage, and now things are, you know, coming to light over time. So does the city actively work with the watershed district to identify issues, and does the city, like, I don't know, provide funding or provide partnership in order to solve any of those issues? Is that something?
Well, I
that
mean, the
goes on?
watershed district is a separate taxing authority.
Right.
It's
So
a
they can-
governmental entity.
Right, so they can-
For that area.
Yeah.
So they have as much ability as we do, and probably better. That, I mean, you know, why should somebody who lives in the Rice Creek watershed district be funding a project up at Goose Lake?
Sure,
So,
yeah. that
and I mean, that's
makes
the
sense.
theory. I mean,
Yeah.
they've broken it down by watershed district.
Yeah.
And they have taxing authority to take care of the projects there, you know, as
Yeah.
opposed to spraying it over everybody within the community.
But I'm just thinking, like, for instance, if there's, you know, a drainage issue that needs to be solved that's gonna have to go across a city street. You know, they've gotta put, say, for instance, a culvert underneath the street. Does the city, like, partner with the watershed district to do that, or does the district
There's
just
always
do it?
communication going on between,
Okay.
you know, us, the watershed district, the conservation district.
And if they
on
need
any
to
of
do
those
something like
issues.
that, they would bring it to the city, and the city would.
Generally, yeah. I mean,
Do
yes,
it.
we were involved in their project on 197th.
Okay.
And they were involved in our project on 197th.
Okay.
So there's continual work with them.
Okay.
At a point, you need to get permits from them, right?
Right.
If for a road project, at a certain point, you're gonna need a permit, right?
so with the current road project, we've already done walkthroughs with them in the field in particular spots that they have interest. And we shared the information we field gathered with them, so they're actually starting to try to piggyback along this Goose Lake area, utilizing some of the information that we've been able to share with them on to develop a project, and then hopefully they'll piggyback with our contractor, right? So in any of those times that we've been able to try to cross that, we have. Pilar, a couple years, 3-4 years ago now, we did some ditching. We walked the roads with them to see what would best work in locations of stuff, and then also you know, once you got to a particular spot where velocities might be high, of some stuff that was implemented to help that, and then you know, really at the end of the day, we need a permit from them on everything that we do anyways. That if we're disturbing over 10,000 square feet at minimum, we're getting erosion sediment control permits. If we're developing other stuff that triggers other thresholds in the permits, we have to go through all that stuff. And then at the end of the projects, we always coordinate walkthroughs to make sure we're in compliance with their permits, and then before we make final payment to a contractor too. So pretty thorough process on just the street projects. In the past, on individual projects that they're scoping, the city has not financially participated, but you really don't have the funding to do so, where a lot of other communities have implemented stormwater utility funds. You know, that's been a discussion here, but primarily the reason we haven't gone there is because it's sometimes considered as another tax.
And most cities that have stormwater utility funds
Are
actually
MS4.
physically have stormwater pipes, and it's to maintain,
Yeah.
you know, the catch basins and keep all of that infrastructure up, where ours is mostly going through ditches and infiltrating.
What if we talked about something not called a stormwater utility fund, but called a water quality insurance fund? I just coined that.
It's pretty defined on what you can collect state statute-wise and
Yeah.
requirements, because, you know, on the flip side, when development was occurring and some communities are trying to, you know, do transportation impact fees or area charges.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard about where Woodbury's going through right now, but it's been considered an illegal charge. So you gotta be very careful on what you do, and the processes already set in place, so.
You know, for something like that, that's why you have watershed districts.
Sure, okay.
And I think Jim's doing a great job,
taxes,
and obviously, the more local knowledge he has on stuff, you know, he's more than willing to meet anybody, anytime.
Yeah.
He's always walking roads, his engineer's very, you know, involved in not just Scandy, but Marine, so they're very knowledgeable of everything going on in the area, and try to piggyback stuff whenever they can, or utilize or share whatever information we have or knowledge, and we sat down and had a lot of discussion over the years on a number of things, so.
Are they
Even
going to
when you
comment on
look
the
at-
comp plan? Has the city asked the watershed to comment on the comp plan with regards to water?
Have we?
They have to.
They have to.
They have to review
They're
it, they have to
required.
approve it.
Once we get it done.
Once you get your
once we
local
it
water
they'll-
plan done,
they'll
it
get
must be submitted to the Met Council and to the 2 watershed districts, and they have to approve it.
But we're trying to work with them to develop a consensus of what should be in there now.
My understanding is that they haven't been asked to participate at this point.
No, we've been working with Carl, the engineer, a little bit,
A little bit, yeah.
so.
Okay.
So there will also be wetlands, floodplains, mapping that'll be included.
I don't know if this is the right place for this, but and maybe this is already included in the policies and I've missed it. But what about having a policy that allows that where we use like zoning slash, you know, the land use planning to encourage development rather than utilizing possibly the map that we have, but utilizing zoning to encourage development in places where there's less sensitivity, less watershed impact. Is that would that be more?
Operationalize it.
How do you operationalize that? Well, like, okay, so we have this water, we have a map, it's on the old comp plan. It's a water sensitivity map or something. I can't remember what it's called.
Water plan too.
It's
But
in the water plan.
do you
The
say
one
that-
I saw was green, but okay.
Do you say to people in areas of high groundwater sensitivity, no development here?
Yeah,
And
can we
then
do
push
that?
the 400 some houses, 500 houses in the plan into other areas.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking?
So
Yeah, that's what I'm
So that
thinking,
may
yeah.
essentially sit there and say, we're gonna abandon downtown Scandia and move downtown Scandia someplace
Well,
else.
obviously within within reason, but
But that's, you know, that's the implication by doing that.
Yeah.
No,
Do
new
they
development.
compensate the landlord for not being able to do anything?
That opens up a huge can of worms.
why would you
Yeah,
compensate
sure
the
does.
landowner?
Well,
Because
if
if
you're
you
a
can't
landlord, you
build,
say
because
you can't do anything here.
Well, you're not going to deny somebody the right to build, but you would
Oh,
deny
okay.
somebody the right to subdivide into 1 acre lots.
You don't allow that
Or-
anywhere.
Well, no, I'm saying hypothetically, you know.
Dramatically
I
speaking.
mean,
Yeah,
you do
dramatically,
that
yeah.
already by saying, this is where we allow 10-acre lots, and this is,
Right, but we don't utilize water quality
That's
as a criteria for those maps. We only utilize, I don't know what we utilize for those maps. Where do these zones come from? Do they don't use water as a criteria? I mean, the shoreland one does. Shoreland overlay does, of course. But you know, that on the old comp plan, there's that water sensitivity map, and I don't know, maybe it does, but it doesn't seem like it's utilized as part of our guide for choosing our zoning
well, where
areas.
people typically use that is when they consider things like commercial development or uses that have the potential to have very significant impact on surface or groundwater. I don't know if you're talking surface or groundwater here, but
I guess all of the above.
yeah, I mean, typically people look at that, you know, groundwater sensitivity, and then they say, well, or wellhead areas, and we have a wellhead protection area here, so we're not going to allow certain kind of land uses in that area because they have a high potential.
Okay. So
When you get to the issue of surface water impacts, typically the way you govern that is with performance standards and watershed standards that manage the quantity and quality of runoff.
Okay.
So that it's your standards about impervious cover. You know, that's,
Okay.
and that if somebody does a development, they are gonna need to comply with all the watershed district and the city rules about managing where that water goes, about maintaining pre-development runoff levels, and, you know, that, you typically manage that through performance standards
Okay.
rather than, I don't know how you would operate, how you would say to people in Scandia, you guys that are all here with your 20-acre parcels or whatever, we're not going to let you subdivide anymore because we think it's going to have a negative impact on water resources.
Why not?
I don't know that you've proved that, for one thing, that someone creating 2-acre or 5-acre lots necessarily is going to have a negative impact.
Well, they're going to have an impact. I mean, okay, maybe don't say negative, just maybe say impact, because you're going to add a well, and then you're also going to add a septic system every time you build a house. So that is an impact one way, you know, whether you say it's minimal or not, it is an impact. So, I mean...
But typically what we worry about are negative impacts.
Well, okay, but, I mean, but a septic system, if it were to fail, would be a negative impact, or I mean...
Which is why there's a county requirement about the performance standards for those systems and how they're designed and how they're managed. And a requirement that when properties change hands, those have to be inspected and they have to be brought up to current standards. I mean, it's those kind of standards that are meant to deal with that issue of how do we minimize impacts on groundwater. I mean, you could go another step and say everybody in the city every 3 years has to have their system tested and make sure it's up to speed. I don't know if the city's willing to go to that level of regulation.
Sure.
It seems like we have systems in place already for a lot of what you're talking about.
It's typically performance standards and permits.
I feel like we've already got a lot of layers of protection for septics and wells.
Would you say that the goals and policies laid out in this water section support those performance standards? And so, in extension, would it be, could we could add a goal/policy that says we want to make sure that when there is development that we have performance standards that require
That any of the impacts be managed or whatever.
Yeah, I'm just saying an additional step, I'm saying, rather than just rely on performance standards that really are just arbitrary and not based on our comp plan.
They're not arbitrary.
Well, okay, arbitrary is wrong, okay. But, you know, but if they're, you know, I'm saying let's put a little bit of, because everything that we do is based on, is modeled off of our comp plan, or starts as a basis on our comp plan. So maybe if we could give the comp plan a little bit more teeth to, or you know, a little bit more pointedness,
Like focus
on the water quality issue, and say that we are going to, when we look at developments, we're going to look at water sensitivity issues, and you know, some kind of goal that includes that.
But Dan, look at the first goal and tell me how you would tweak that. Or actually look at the first two goals.
Well, and I saw those, and they just seem really general.
Well, one thing
and a plan is supposed to be general. This is a very high-level view
right,
that leads to goals, policies, and the lowest level in terms of enforcement is what Sherry's talking about, the performance standards.
Yeah.
And you could have a goal in there to review your performance standards for surface water management that are in your ordinance. I mean, they haven't been looked at since the last time.
Right, but that's not a goal.
That's not a goal.
It's a policy
that would be
or whatever.
implementation. That would be the implementation.
An implementation step.
Two of them.
But that's, you know, I mean, that's how you would, if you have the general goal in your plan to try to manage development to maintain or improve the quality of surface waters in the city, then the way you implement or operationalize that is you go back and you look at your performance standards
and see if they're up to
and
snuff.
see if they're up to snuff.
Okay.
I guess
and
I don't see why that first goal doesn't cover this stuff.
Yeah, I guess
to me as a goal,
does.
it does.
I agree with you that it does. I guess my point is that I feel like this is just a cursory nod at preserving water quality. It's like, we want to do that. Yeah, okay.
But
good.
that's how
Let's move on.
that's the point of like, how do you implement this? Then you say, we're gonna review our standards and do this. Or you have a, you know, we're gonna require everybody to get a county permit for their septic system and comply with that. I mean, those are the ways you operationalize.
Okay, so it's more of an operational
So are we
thing
not
rather
getting
than
into
a
the
goal.
operational, when do we talk about those?
That can be in your comp plan as an implementation step. You're gonna have an implementation chapter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's where all that would go.
Specifically to your septic, the last goal and policy talks about Washington County enforcing strict conformance with regulations for design, installation, and maintenance on on-site treatment systems.
Mm-hmm.
And in some comp plans, there's a policy or a recommendation that landowners get their wells tested regularly. You can't require it, but you can certainly have a policy or a recommendation that people do that, and the city can have info about it on their website if you don't. You know, I think that's the, but your implementation section would be the one where you'd say, yeah, it's time to make sure we look through our standards, that we update our zoning map, that we update our ordinance, whatever, to make sure we're implementing those policies.
Sure.
I think, you know, as a builder, Dan, the septic and well is heavily scrutinized.
Sure.
You got the state level, you got the county level, and you know, you've got a 2-year pump out your tank inspection. That everybody's residents, so I mean, those systems are being monitored and checked.
Sure.
Yeah,
The well's not being checked, but.
And every time, again, the well is not being checked, but I know every time we have our septic pump, the person who does it gives us a report on what's going on with it.
Right,
And
that's gotta go to the county too.
And that goes to the county in his report, so it's not an inspection, but it ends up being the same.
Well, it is an inspection.
I mean, it is, yeah.
Yeah, it's an inspection by the county.
Yeah, so I mean, that does happen.
And you've always, when you put in a new well, you're sending samples to the state, and that's gotta be approved.
Right.
So there is a lot of oversight on
It's
those
more
two
the old
systems right
stuff.
now.
It's the old stuff that's
Yeah.
problematic, and the only way you deal with that is most communities do is at point of sale, that people have to upgrade.
Right, that's when they get thoroughly checked.
Sure, yeah. Did you have another comment on that?
I'm a citizen, and obviously I'm here as the writer of the letter. I've learned a lot in the last 2 years since I've been interested in this subject for quite a while. I've talked to Washington County Public Health and Environment. The standard for water that leaves a septic system is not that that water has to be potable. In fact, it's not an adequate filtration system to create drinkable water, and that is the standard. So we are basically in a system that allows septic systems to produce water that is not drinkable. So if we're increasing densities on lakes that are already polluted by nitrates, which we presume are farm runoff, but in this case are probably human waste related, we are actually creating a higher level opportunity for toxicity to enter the system. I think it's really important to understand what water sensitivity means. Water sensitivity, my understanding, talking to USGS, means the porosity of the superficial soil, the time it takes groundwater to reach the water table. And so we have a flawed system, and frankly what's going on is it's very siloed. The watershed district prioritizes erosion, and yet you guys have talked about erosion being an issue. Their new comp plan could include oversight of some of the issues that we're concerned about. Currently it does not. The watershed district does not spend time concerned about water quality issues that are with regards to septic systems. That's not what they do now. They could, but they don't do it now. But the standard that Washington County has would shock you.
Because it's a low standard, you're
It's
saying.
a very low standard, and because it is the law, and we work with people who have to subscribe to the law just like you do, those standards are tolerated.
Right, but
So
then again, what you're talking about is at a step of implementation of policy and goal.
But if we know,
And
but
so
if
the
we
question
know,
gets to be, how would the city of Scandia establish a higher standard?
Yeah.
by disallowing greater densities of septics near shorelines. That would be one, and also to be aware that water tables fluctuate in terms of where groundwater is impacting those water tables. And if septic systems are not producing potable water, in fact, if septic systems are also sending carcinogens into the system, because we have a lot of people who are being treated for cancer in our community, just like every other community, the amount of effluent that is toxic leaving those septic systems will shock you. We are not producing clean water.
You're not drinking like water.
So, well, right.
But I think, to answer the question specifically about developing along shoreland, I mean, you're not going to see density in future developments along shoreland. I mean, we've been updating the shoreland ordinance, and what's the minimum frontage right now, Sherry?
On like Big Marine Lake, it's 150 feet and a 2.5 acre lot.
Lake, it's 300 feet.
Right. I mean, what's
On
being
2.5
developed there is
acres.
existing.
So, on a natural environment lake, which are the ones with highest quality, you're talking about a
500.
house on 2.5 acres with 300 feet of frontage. That's not much density. I mean, we can't, and I mean, the other thing that ends up happening, that when we're hitting, the smaller lots in the Bliss Edition where you do have density, one of the things that we've always looked at is, we're fortunate to have those systems there, but anytime there's a variance, we're going to the county. And, to say, and I don't know how many systems we've had, that they've come in as part of our whole variance process and required the owner to replace. So, I mean, I think going into the future to say what's going to happen, you look at it and, yes, one house per 300 feet of frontage is going to have an impact, but it's nowhere near the impact than, you go down to the Bliss Edition where you have a series of 50-foot lots.
But aren't you looking at a variance that the DNR has proposed to increase densities on shorelines? And as I heard in the last planning commission meeting, that you want to incentivize development. So you're going to be willing to allow that to happen.
No. We are looking at our shoreland development, but it's not necessarily
Going to increase density.
Okay.
Okay.
It depends on how that goes.
Right.
We still have the public hearing on that.
Okay.
We'll see how that goes.
So I wanted to use one more example just to give you a sense of where my position comes from. So you know where I live. I have 80 acres. I'm on the St. Croix River.
Mhm.
A development happened that was a variance, right? There were 7 lots that were under the 10-acre minimum, but they were allowed. This was before Scandia was a city. It was when Scandia was still a village. Those variances were allowed. We all have compliant septic systems. We all pump our septic systems on schedule. And the spring boxes, the houses below us were older houses who relied on drinking water from spring boxes. All of those spring boxes have been contaminated. They are no longer drinkable. This isn't about density, it's about water sensitivity. It's about the time it takes for groundwater to reach the water table, and since we're putting septic systems in that are letting non-potable water flow into the system, whether we want to admit it or not, we are contributing to a huge water crisis, really. And I just think that we have to acknowledge that. This is a comp planning phase. We live in a very sensitive watershed. There's karst formation. There's plenty of, sand and gravel that is, we know from the Zavril mine that it doesn't take as long as they were proposing initially for groundwater to reach the water table. We tested that in the process. That's why there were so many water testing sites for that, for the mine.
So
it doesn't mean that we have to curtail development. It means we have to guide it. We have to use the most updated, the most stringent measures. And I'm saying I think it's a priority because everything that we produce in Scandia in the form of groundwater flows into the St. Croix River, which is we don't own that river. We all do, right? It's a national wild and scenic river.
Yeah. Well, and the truth is, what we've talked about here tonight, though, is that it sounds like that's more in the implementation phase of how we're going to do this. I mean, if we're not going to be so specific in this comp plan about saying something about how septics, we are not going to, I should say, be so specific that we're going to say, for instance, septics have to be 500 feet apart or whatever. Just saying, whatever it happens to be. This is not the place for that.
Okay.
As we've discussed,
It would be in your
at length.
in putting together your zoning map.
Yeah.
And your performance standards in your ordinance. I mean, what you do in a comp plan is just say.
Right. So
Yeah.
right. So going forward, I think we need to keep up with this and make sure that we do right by this plan.
And I have to say, Mr. Noyes, my intention is not to hinder progress or development at all. It's simply to base decisions about zoning and densities on science, so that we can quantify as well as qualify, as much as we can know, potential impacts of anything that we do. Currently, Scandia has a beautiful situation where we don't have a lot of development. And in the world that we're facing, that is a perfect scenario to sustain health and well-being. But we are going to add density. How we do that will have consequences that will reach so far into the future, you won't have an opportunity to witness it. That's where we are. And I think it's so important that we take that seriously. I know I do. I'm a water quality certified farm, which means every decision I make is monitored by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture for impact to water. I was not allowed to put rock phosphate on my field last fall, period, which it needed, but I couldn't because the potential for runoff is too great. And it's such a porous area, and my field feeds 2 watersheds. I know that. So I'm compliant out of choice. It's a hindrance, but what I'm learning makes it all worthwhile to me. And I'm here simply to share my concern, as well as my commitment as a community member. And I'm willing to talk about what I do. And I've talked to many homeowners who have said, I wish I had that resource because I don't know how I'm impacting my watershed. And I'd like to know. It's exciting to know that the water you're drinking might be 6 million years old. Isn't that exciting?
That's exciting. I agree. Thank you, Pam. I think we need to, thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank
you. Do you have?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I've been sitting silent for a while, just taking all that. I think that there's an opportunity because Pam brings up some very, very solid points. That the regulations just might be
not good enough.
Not good enough, right? And I think that in terms of development, growth in this community, even all the way down to a single variance, we lean on these sub-organizations to give us feedback. We lean on the DNR, we lean on the watershed, we lean on Washington County, we lean on the state to give us these regulations, and we trust that they are making the best decision when in fact I can relate it to what I do for work, which is safety. If we relied all of risk and safety on OSHA, the world would be a crazy place. because OSHA is the minimum expectations in terms of safety, and I have to believe that there are things out there in terms of wells and septics and protecting groundwater and watershed that are probably minimum expectations. And so I think that it warrants at least further discussion, further investigation, and possibly creating, like you said, deeper down implementation effects to really make this thing not be a box checking goal. You know what I mean? And I think that we should really, this shouldn't be the end, this should be the beginning of this conversation. That when we look at development, part of growth should not just be what does Watershed think of the groundwater in this area, and what does DNR think of the groundwater in this area, but what does Scandia think of the groundwater in this area, because we cannot deny the fact that it's a natural resource that we are consuming, that we can never return back to its original condition unless we are deliberate about it.
Yeah. And using the science to determine all those
Sure.
things as opposed to just the minimum standards.
All the resources that are available to us versus just the
not
ones
just
that
the
are.
minimal standards that are
Right.
presented.
I think it'd be really difficult, however, like you said, Sherry, I think it's going to be really difficult for Scandia to create its own water quality requirements. Or, you know,
Well, and for one thing, the aquifers here are not confined to Scandia. I mean, that's
Right.
why a lot of the regulations are set by state and watershed organizations, because even if you try to set your own standards and much higher, there's a fair amount of it you can't control.
Because it's affected by other people too.
Because it's the people upstream.
But we can affect our.
You can affect
do our
yours.
small part.
But I think one of the things here, when you talk about doing your part, you have to realize there are overlapping jurisdictions. And some of this conversation is, the watershed districts are each their own separate taxing authorities. They have their own plans. And, if you want to sit there and say, we're going to regulate it, well, now we have competing staff doing the same thing as the watershed district. Is that really where you want to go? I mean, because they're there for a specific purpose, and a lot of this conversation should really be directed at their meetings with regard to their plans.
And commenting on their
That's what they do, that's what their focus is.
That's fair. I also think that is completely fair, and we should go down to those meetings and have these conversations. I also think that, again, if we want to turn around to something that I know like the back of my hand, OSHA does not require people to wear safety glasses when they do certain things, and there are 99% of companies that require 100% safety glasses use. Just because it's common sense to wear safety glasses when you're doing construction activities. You don't need OSHA, who has let's call it a 10% requirement to set the standard, when really it should be 90% or 100% requirement to wear glasses when you're doing construction activities, right? And so I think that there are probably opportunities for us to just set a higher standard because we want to
the trick is the city spending.
Either.
Yeah, the trick is the city spending the money to do that. I mean, that's trying to do your own science.
Treat your wastewater to drinking water standard.
So I think that,
for instance.
Yeah, sure. Maybe.
Actually, it has more to do with what you throw down your toilet and your sink. If you were informed, and that could be the role. And this is not costly. I've been doing this without spending too much money, I must tell you. It doesn't cost me much. I think if we could create a value for water in our community, just simply communicate that we care about that, that's the beginning, because the energy that I have comes from concern. Well,
and I think that's our quarterly publication or whatever semi-annual publication that we have. If there is simply just a memo that said, if you are receiving treatment for cancer, be aware that whatever, or if you take these drugs, be aware that this. I mean, it could be as simple as a corner of a newsletter, which I know, by the way, people read because they knew about the new fire chief position before anybody else did. People that read that letter. So they do read it, and that could be a very simple, cheap way to at least disseminate information.
Thank you.
It's probably not necessarily going around and requiring everybody to upgrade a system to something that creates potable water, but it is maybe considering the future development, where that is and how.
That is a great idea, Travis.
Thank you.
I don't, it's maybe complicating things, but I think that we in Scandia can do a small part.
Nothing, I mean, you can certainly put that in your implementation section of your plan. If
Sure.
you're gonna use the city website and newsletter to
Yeah.
disseminate information on protecting water. Not a
Yeah.
problem to have that as one of your implementations.
Maybe a clean water awareness.
I mean, plenty of people have that in their,
And I do think that, in fact, if people knew what they were putting down their systems, there are people, my husband's one of them, that he will not put a banana peel in a garbage can because he knows that organic waste in a landfill is the worst type of waste you can put in a landfill. So all of our waste, in terms of food, goes in an ice cream pail and stinks up our kitchen and then goes out to the back and we recycle it. So there are people that I know would be consciously making changes to affect the groundwater
If they knew, yeah, education, yeah. Yeah, and maybe we could get some local expert to write some, thing that we could add into the
We have a columnist?
I don't know, maybe somebody who might know, that might know something about that.
I seem to recall seeing at least 2 articles coming out of the Washington County newsletter on this very topic.
Yeah,
So
okay.
this is an ongoing discussion and awareness education, attempt.
There have been other things, I think, in other communities too, that, where other communities have been leaders in certain things, whether it's bike trails or
Yeah,
anything else. And I
Yeah.
think that there's, Scandia has the potential to be a leader in terms of
water quality
preservation.
preservation. Sure, yeah. Good
I,
idea.
I really feel that the state, the county level, we're doing the best we can with septic systems. I used to build a lot in Cook County up in northern Minnesota, and they are super aggressive on septic systems and roof systems, and we got into peat systems for a while, and they backed off on some of their requirements for septic systems because they decided, can't tell you how, that they were working good. So they've done a lot of research up there, because everything up there is on bedrock. There's not a lot of soil, so it's a very sensitive area. And if I can get some information on that, I will. But I think we're doing the best we can with what we currently have available.
How does this conversation continue? And where do the detailed kind of bulleted,
it'll be in your implementation plan.
and how and when does that get created?
Usually the last chapter of a comp plan.
Once we have some direction, I guess, on each of the chapters, then you can create the implementation plan.
So is that gonna be after we finish going through all these?
Yeah, so I guess more deep, the specifics I'm looking for is, okay, so comp plan is finished by May, the ideal comp plan, and then there's a 3-month implementation development period, and that's done by a group of people that are passionate about that topic, or how does that
No,
work?
you would, in your comp plan, you will have a chapter called implementation. You
Okay.
have to.
Sure.
And it will say, we will update our zoning ordinance, we will blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Then you have 9 months after the city adopts your comp plan to get your zoning map adopted and to get your ordinances updated to be consistent with the comp plan.
Okay. So when
So that's a year from September.
Sure. So you said that the implementation
September.
chapter,
A year from this coming September.
This coming.
Yeah,
So September 2019.
yeah.
and that's with the completed implementation section that we've been talking about.
Yeah, so typically, I mean, I don't know what your planner's doing, but typically what a planner would do is, as you're developing these sections with the goals and policies, he or she would be thinking of what are the implementation steps and starting to develop that as a draft section for that
Yep.
chapter,
Yep.
so that one of the last steps in the plan will be you guys looking at that implementation chapter and saying, okay, have we got the stuff in place here to implement these goals and
So
policies?
he or she is not here tonight, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so how did they get everything that we've discussed here tonight?
That's what Ryan's here for.
And,
Okay.
and there's notes being taken, so,
And a video.
and a video.
Right, and, yeah, as long, I mean, it's, okay.
Yeah.
I think there's been a lot of good discussion.
So
a
these
lot
two
of-
sections are pretty technical,
Yeah,
thus, like in transportation, obviously I get involved. Water resource with the surface water, wetlands,
Mhm.
a wetland, or a water resource engineer has been working on that stuff.
who's that?
Tim Olson,
And that's, City of Scandia engine?
he's with me.
We contracted with their engineering firm
Okay.
for doing the comp plan.
Got it.
And then when there's some better direction on all the other chapters, then I will start diving into the water supply and wastewater.
Implementation of it.
The chapters first.
Okay.
With the goals and policies and then the implementation.
What chapters did you just say? Sorry, I thought you were.
Water supply.
So the new formats with Met Council requirements is water resources is one big category.
Okay.
But they have 3 subcategories to that. And one, surface water,
Got it.
water supply,
I see.
and wastewater.
Wow, they really make this seem complicated.
Well, they break it down into these specific sections now because there'll be all these comp plans coming in for review, and somebody that's designated the Met Council is only gonna look at this chapter.
Sure.
And there's a list, you know, there's a sort of a page for each of these things, a list and check boxes of you must provide this. You must provide a map of all the septic systems in your community. You must provide a map that shows which aquifers are in your community. I mean, for every one of these sections, their planner is looking at this long list of things that must be in there.
Sure.
And then, in each of those sections, there's typically goals and policies section, which you're getting familiar with.
Yep.
And then one of the requirements is the implementation plan that will say this is the steps we're gonna take to actually implement this stuff.
So you said Mr. Olson are going to be creating some of these implementation sections of these subcategories.
Yep.
Right. So when do you anticipate those being completed, and who gets to review those before they're all sent in and done?
And
We'll look at them, won't we?
you guys will, you'll
Yeah.
see that chapter, the implementation chapter. I'm sure they're gonna see all the chapters, right, before they go?
Yep.
So toward
I mean,
the
I think
end,
we have
typically
both.
that implementation one is one of the last ones the planner would bring to you to look at.
Okay.
And that's where over the next couple of meetings, because I mean, you know, we pretty much identified that the plan needs to be reviewed by the council at the May meeting in order to get the timeline for review by other entities.
Right. And that's my concern, is that it's going to be rolling for you. It's going to be cooking here. There's a lot of sections I'm sure to review.
Good.
Yeah. Is this all sent, so this is all publicly documented, and folks that are passionate about these certain topics can come to these meetings. And I know that tonight we only had one person present, and so this was during a discussion session. There wasn't really time for public comment, but with one person we were allowed.
When we get the final
There's a
comp
plan
plan,
for, the planning commission has to hold a public hearing, and that'll be the opportunity.
will that just be one meeting?
Yes.
Will be a public hearing, just a
Yes.
single one?
But you've had other community
Yeah, I mean,
meetings
we've
on
had,
this.
you know, actually fairly, very extensive, and I mean, Ryan's seen it in other communities, we've probably been more extensive than most communities in terms of what we've done for public outreach and public input.
Okay. That's
I
all.
chaired the last meeting on that, and there was a lot of people that came, so.
Okay. We'll look forward to that. I will. Yeah. That's fun. That's the fun stuff. Come on.
You did such a good
All right.
job, you'll get to do it.
All right, any items for future agendas?
Comp plan stuff.
Any more complaints?
Neil, do we want to bring up the solar field?
You can talk, yeah, well, I know, Doctor, you can bring it up right now, you know, talk about it in a future meeting.
Just really quick, I've been talking with Erica, who spoke here a couple meetings ago, and I know they've got some property, I don't know if it's under lease option or they purchased it, but they want the ordinance to come back so they can put in their solar field. And I told her the problems we've had and what people are upset about, and she's like, well, we're doing things differently now. And I've been keeping Neil in the loop to kind of learn because I'm new to this a little bit. She very badly wants to come back and talk, because she wants to get her field going. But it kind of sounds like it's a good time because people are really upset about what has happened. And maybe just some time needs to pass.
I'm upset about what has happened.
Me too.
I haven't seen
yeah, I
the
am
fence
too.
that they said they were gonna put up.
It sounds like Scandia's gotten burned on their system.
And I haven't seen any plan that had 15 poles.
No, because they didn't. That requirement came later.
And those 15 poles are ridiculous.
Well, it sounds like now it's down to one pole.
One post too many.
Right, well, we have other gardens that are up with
Yeah.
15 poles.
Yeah.
One of them being right in the smack dab in a view shed.
I think the question is, do you guys wanna hear from this person, or do you
Yeah.
wanna say to
We
them,
wanna-
we need,
I don't know, what do you
we
guys
need
think?
more
Do you guys
time?
wanna, to have her come back? She was here last month, a couple months.
Yeah.
2 months ago.
And we can keep the solar field thing off for a while, but obviously at some point,
She would like to come.
we've gotta think about it again. Do we wanna try to nail down some more rules and?
Or do you wanna wait till the comp plan's done, or?
Yeah, I feel like I've been duped already with this whole thing, so.
That's how I feel about it. Jan?
Jan, who has
I have very mixed feelings on the
Okay.
topic, but we can't have any more solar fields without an ordinance.
Right.
So unless we're prepared to start writing another ordinance, I think what we're talking about is having her give us some input on how we might go about writing another ordinance,
Well,
but that would
Oh my
be
goodness,
done
I cannot
over a
imagine.
period of time.
do we wanna open that door now at all?
Pandora's box in the middle of planning commission time, or in the middle of comp plan time?
I think it should be put off till we get done with the comp plan myself.
I think that's a good idea.
Yikes.
Tom, any
There's
thoughts?
gonna be a full room for that conversation. I don't wanna have to be in the middle of planning or comp plan.
We wrestled with that solar, farm, ordinance, and we still didn't get what we wanted.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of how we would recommend to get.
Yeah. Well,
It would be so.
you don't have to solve that problem now. What do you think about hearing
No,
hearing
we don't
now?
have, we don't have to solve that now.
No,
I'm saying, the question now is are you interested in having somebody come and talk about it before?
Not if we're not ready to act on it.
Yeah.
I'm not, I think that it would be wasting her time and our time to have her come and talk
Okay.
at the
Tell her
next
that
meeting.
other people ruined her
Yeah, I
opportunity.
Yeah, I told her that last month.
And I told her, I said, I'm new to the commission, so I'm not here to get you in there to speak.
It might be
I'll
a-
just bring it up.
Yeah, and judging by the comments on our social media site, on the Nextdoor site, there's a lot of emotion out there about it.
Yeah.
And it's a very volatile issue.
Yeah.
Well, it should be, I think it didn't go well.
It might be a benefit if you guys speak with Chisago County. There's a lot of things going on right there right now because they really didn't have anything in place. And they, preliminary saw what you guys did have, but they're taking things, it seems like, way beyond that now because of the number of projects that have occurred in Chisago County. And
What do you mean to take?
Well, they had an ordinance, the difference is there wasn't a CUP. So
But
none
they
of their
got a lot of-
projects had public hearings or,
there's a lot of stuff that's been occurring the last month.
yeah. I mean, it's changing now, they're changing their ordinance, but they did have an ordinance before. The difference was they didn't require a conditional use
Anything
permit.
below 20 acres didn't require
Require-
a conditional use permit.
Yeah,
It was
so
admin-
a lot of stuff got built
Yeah.
without it.
Yeah.
My sense when this came up before is that you guys really were not ready to hear about this again, and you needed to have some time, you wanted to have some time away from it.
Well, and I think we also need to have some time to have these projects that are not completed, see what happens with them and,
Well,
because some of them,
age.
well, some of them are being handled very differently than others.
Yeah.
I mean, just right next door to each other on 97 over here, these two are being handled very differently from what
I
I
think,
can see.
I think that, and I'm like half joking, but I'm also very half serious about this. If she can go to all the people that have already started their gardens or finished their gardens and make sure that everything they promised us is happening, which is not, and move
Not
those
really
them
her
to
job.
those poles.
Negotiate.
If she can take care of all that, then I'll listen to her.
Sure.
That's an interesting
I'm not
thought.
even kidding. Let's move on.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, so
That's it.
that's it. Okay.
We're not talking about-
Any other items for future agendas?
Movie, I'll take it over.
Not next month, anyway.
All right,
Move
our
to
next
adjourn.
meeting is March 6th, 2018.
Move to adjourn.
All those in favor? Aye.